Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the serene rhythms of everyday life in a medieval monastery. What you're about to discover is a world where time moved to the gentle chime of bells, not the clang of swords. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 2:00 a.m., and the medieval monastery is your new reality. You're awake, but it's not because you couldn't resist the snooze button. No, it's because the clanging of the bell just cut through the stillness like a knife through butter. Welcome to the world of monastic discipline, where sleep is more of a suggestion than a necessity. If you're thinking, why on earth are we awake at this ungodly hour? Well, you're not alone. Yet, for a monk following the rule of St. Benedict, this is just the start of another day dedicated to a higher calling. Now, before you start questioning your life choices, let's unravel why this early wake-up call is a thing. The Rule of St. Benedict, written around 530 AD, is essentially the ultimate guidebook for a monk's life. It maps out everything from prayer schedules to mealtime etiquette, and yes, it insists that you rise before the sun. According to Benedict, to rise in the night for the divine office is a sacred duty, a practice meant to keep you spiritually vigilant, and let's be honest, probably a little sleep-deprived. But why would anyone choose, or be chosen, to live like this? Let's dive into the nitty-gritty mechanics of medieval society. Back then, joining a monastery wasn't just about piety, it was also a practical decision. For some, it was an escape from the chaos of medieval life, where wars, plagues, famines were more reliable than rain in England. For others, it was a family decision. Often the younger sons of nobility, who weren't in line to inherit land, were encouraged to take the monastic path. Think of it as the medieval version of a career in finance, a stable gig with room and board included. And let's not forget the economic incentives. Monasteries were the medieval equivalent of economic powerhouses. They owned vast tracts of land, engaged in agriculture, and even lent money. So, while monks were busy chanting in Latin, they were also part of a well-oiled economic machine. Becoming a monk could mean trading the uncertainties of peasant life for the relative security of monastic living. It wasn't all incense and piety. It was also about pragmatism, and dare we say, a bit of medieval social climbing. So here you are, standing in the dim pre-dawn light, surrounded by fellow monks who look just as bleary-eyed as you feel. It's time for the first prayer session of the day, known as vigils. This isn't just a quick thank you God moment. It's an extended liturgy that could last up to 2 hours. That's a lot of chanting, and a solid chunk of your day before most people have even considered breakfast. But as you drone through the Psalms, you start to realize that this repetition serves a purpose. It's about discipline, about tuning your mind to a different frequency, and yeah, maybe even about keeping you too exhausted to rebel. Now, let's bust a few myths about this monastic life. First off, if you're imagining monks as solitary hermits in tiny cells, think again. Many monasteries were bustling communities, more like small towns than isolated retreats. They had guest houses, farms, and even breweries. Yes, beer. Monks brewed beer as a clean and nutritious alternative to the often questionable medieval water supply. So, while you might be abstaining from worldly pleasures, you're not living on bread and water alone. And about that vow of poverty, it's more nuanced than you might think. Individually, monks owned nothing. Collectively, they managed resources that would make any medieval lord green with envy. The monastery's wealth was used for the community's needs and charitable works, but it also meant that monks were insulated from the worst of medieval life's unpredictability. So, while the romantic image of a monk is someone detached from material concerns, the reality is a bit more grounded in economic savvy. By the time you've finished vigils, the monastery is starting to stir. Some monks head to the library, transcribing texts by candlelight, a task that requires the patience of a saint and the eyesight of a hawk. Others might head to the kitchen or the gardens, their work part of a daily rhythm that keeps the monastery self-sufficient. You might be surprised to learn that, despite the spiritual focus, a monk's life is as much about labor as it is about prayer. The Rule of St. Benedict famously states, Idleness is the enemy of the soul, and there's no room for slackers in this divine economy. So why do you stay? Why did anyone stay? Perhaps, in the structured chaos of monastic life, there's a kind of peace. The world outside might be unpredictable, but here, every day is a cycle of prayer, work, and reflection. It's a life stripped down to essentials, where the divine is intertwined with the mundane, and where the ringing of a bell is both a beginning and an end. As you prepare for the next prayer session, Lords, the sky begins to brighten, hinting at the day ahead. It's a new rhythm, a new way of life, and maybe, just maybe, it's starting to make a kind of sense. As the sky transitions from inky black to a palette of pale pinks and yellows, the monastery pulses with life, like a medieval beehive buzzing with silent purpose. You shuffle along with the other monks to the chapel for Lords, the second prayer session of the day. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the soundtrack of this monastic life, the Gregorian chant. Now, if you think it's just a medieval Spotify playlist for the devout, think again. This wasn't your average hum-along tune. It was an intricate, highly disciplined art form. Think of it as the classical music of its day, minus the fancy concert halls and expensive tickets. Gregorian chant, named after Pope Gregory I, who reigned from 590 to 604 AD, is a cappella singing that's been described as music for angels. But don't let the celestial imagery fool you. Learning these complex melodies required serious dedication. Imagine memorizing entire psalms in Latin without any sheet music, relying solely on musical notation that looks like a cross between a treasure map and a math problem. It's a miracle anyone got through it without a meltdown. Yet for the monks, this was more than just a daily ritual. It was a way to unify their voices and, spiritually speaking, get on the same page. After Lords, it's time for breakfast, which is a communal affair. Forget about bacon and eggs, though. The menu's more about practicality than pleasure. Monks typically dined on simple fare like porridge or bread, washed down with a mug of ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Before you raise an eyebrow, remember this was the Middle Ages, when water was often as reliable as a medieval weatherman. Fermented drinks were safer and packed with calories, essential for those long hours of prayer and labor. Now, it's tempting to romanticize these communal meals as serene gatherings of pious souls. But let's inject a little reality here. Silence was the norm during meals, with only the assigned reader breaking the quiet by reciting religious texts. It sounds peaceful, but imagine trying to enjoy your porridge while someone drones on about eternal damnation. Not exactly a hallmark moment, is it? Yet, this practice reinforced the communal bonds and kept focus on their spiritual mission, even if it wasn't the most socially engaging breakfast club. With breakfast over, the monastery's economic engine revs up for the day. Remember, these places weren't just spiritual retreats, they were economic juggernauts. Much of the monastery's income was generated through agriculture. Vast fields of wheat, barley, and other crops surrounded the cloistered walls, tended by lay brothers and sometimes local peasants. The monks didn't just pray for their supper, they planted and harvested it too. This agricultural prowess wasn't just about self-sufficiency, it was cold, hard medieval economics. The excess produce was sold in local markets, keeping the coffers and the monks' bellies full. But agriculture was just one cog in this well-oiled machine. Enter the scriptorium, where monks meticulously copied manuscripts by hand. Forget the romantic notion of solitary monks hunched over under flickering candlelight. This was the medieval equivalent of a tech startup. They were churning out religious texts, scientific treatises, and even the odd piece of classical literature. These manuscripts were highly prized, fetching steep prices from wealthy patrons and other monasteries. Talk about a side hustle. It's no exaggeration to say monks were among the original content creators, ensuring the preservation of knowledge long before the printing press revolutionized the game. Now, let's switch gears to something a bit less romantic, medieval healthcare. Picture this, a world without antibiotics, where the common cold could be a death sentence, and the Black Death was the medieval equivalent of a zombie apocalypse. Yet, surprisingly, monasteries were at the forefront of healthcare. They had infirmaries where monks practiced a form of early medicine. Sure, some treatments involved leeches and bloodletting. Medieval medicine wasn't exactly cutting-edge by today's standards, but they also used herbal remedies and maintained strict hygiene, a rarity in those days. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century, Killing an estimated 25 million people, monasteries often served as makeshift hospitals. Monks cared for the sick, sometimes at great personal risk. It wasn't just about charity, it was about duty. They believed in serving the community, even if it meant staring down the bubonic plague. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, monasteries were islands of relative stability, offering both spiritual solace and practical care to a desperate populace. So, as the day unfolds, you find yourself part of a complex tapestry woven from prayer, work, and community life. This isn't just a retreat from the world. It's a microcosm of medieval society, where the sacred and the practical intertwine. It's a world where the ethereal beauty of a Gregorian chant meets the gritty reality of agricultural toil, where communal meals nourish both body and soul, and where ancient manuscripts become the lifeline for knowledge in a world starved for enlightenment. And yet, despite the rigor and routine, there's an undeniable allure to this monastic life. It's a place where time seems to stand still, offering a continuity that the outside world, with its wars and plagues, cannot. As you prepare for the day's next tasks, whether it's working in the fields or scribing a manuscript, you realize there's a certain peace in the predictability. It's a life stripped of distraction and focused on the essentials. In a world as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast, there's something comforting in that. As the monastery's routine unfolds, the afternoon brings a shift from the morning's spiritual endeavors to a focus on labor and study. Forget the image of monks as mere prayer machines. These guys were more like medieval multitaskers. Sure, they prayed a lot, but they also rolled up their sleeves and got down to the nitty-gritty of life. From the quiet scriptorium to the bustling brewery, a monk's day was as diverse as a modern-day resume. Let's start with the beer, because really, why not? Monks were the original craft brewers, long before hipster taprooms were a thing. Brewing wasn't just a hobby, it was a vital skill. Water in medieval times could be as dubious as a politician's promise, so beer, with its fermentation process, was safer and tastier. Some monasteries became renowned for their brewing prowess, with recipes as closely guarded as family secrets. And while today you might pay a premium for a Trappist ale, back then it was all about practicality. It was nourishment in a mug, providing the calories needed for a day of physical labor or scholarly pursuits. Speaking of scholarly pursuits, let's talk about the scriptorium. Picture a dimly lit room filled with the soft scratching of quills on parchment. This wasn't just about transcribing the Bible, though that was certainly a big part of it. Monks copied everything from scientific manuscripts to classical texts, making them indispensable to the preservation of knowledge. Think of them as the librarians of the Middle Ages, except their version of the Dewey Decimal System was a meticulous catalogue of hand-copied works. It's a bit like Wikipedia, but written by candlelight, and with a lot more back pain involved. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all about quiet contemplation. Life in a monastery was also about hard labor. Benedict's rule emphasized ora et labora, prayer and work, as the backbone of monastic life. This wasn't some ancient version of a lazy Sunday. Monks worked the land, tended the livestock, and even engaged in artisanal crafts. These weren't just chores to pass the time. They were essential for the monastery's survival. And let's not forget, these laborious tasks helped keep the mind focused and the soul humble. Now, if you think monks were isolated from the political machinations of medieval Europe, think again. Monasteries weren't just spiritual retreats, they were powerhouses of influence. Owning vast tracts of land and wielding economic clout, they played a significant role in regional politics. Monarchs often sought the support of powerful abbots, whose influence could sway local nobility. Monasteries could be kingmakers, and their backing was as sought after as a modern-day political endorsement. It's no wonder some abbots lived with the grandeur of a small prince, their influence extending far beyond the cloistered walls. The power of monasteries was such that they could even challenge the authority of local bishops. Not all monasteries answered directly to their dioceses. Some reported straight to the Pope, making them essentially independent states within a state. This independence allowed them to amass wealth and power, sometimes leading to tensions with secular rulers. To put it in modern terms, they were like the Silicon Valley startups of their day, with influence that could disrupt the status quo. Yet, for all their power and influence, monks remained committed to their spiritual duties. The balance between prayer and labor was crucial, and the afternoon hours were often punctuated by brief moments of reflection and prayer. The divine office, set of daily prayers, structured their day, ensuring that even in the midst of their worldly tasks, their focus remained on the divine. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cloistered halls, the monks gathered once more for vespers. This evening prayer, rich with chanting and incense, served as a spiritual bookend to a day filled with both the sacred and the mundane. It was a reminder that, despite the worldly responsibilities, their ultimate purpose was spiritual. So there you have it, a day in the life of a medieval monk, filled with hard work, spiritual devotion, and a surprising amount of influence. It's a life that defies easy categorization, blending the sacred with the secular, the spiritual with the practical. As you reflect on the day's activities, it's clear that monastic life was far more complex and multifaceted than the simple image of a monk in prayer. It was a life of balance, a delicate dance between the demands of the soul and the needs of the world. And as the evening shadows lengthen and the monastery settles into a quiet rhythm, there's a sense of peace in this ordered life. It's a world where every task, from brewing beer to copying texts, is imbued with purpose. Here, in the heart of the monastery, time seems to slow, offering a refuge from the chaos beyond its walls. As you prepare for Compline, the final prayer of the day, you realize that this life, with its unique blend of labor and prayer, offers a kind of stability and peace rarely found in the outside world. The day may be ending, but the rhythm of monastic life continues, a testament to the enduring appeal of this ancient way of living. As the final notes of Vespers fade into the cool evening air, you find yourself pondering the duality of monastic life. Here, in these hallowed halls, silence and contemplation reign supreme. Contrast this with the medieval feasts happening in the manors and castles beyond the cloister walls, where the only silence you'd find was the pause between raucous laughter and the clinking of goblets. Monasteries and feasts, two sides of the medieval coin, each offering its own kind of escape from the everyday chaos. Vespers, the evening prayer, is a reflective pause in the day, a time for monks to contemplate their spiritual journey. This isn't just a dimly lit room filled with solemn faces. It's a meditative ritual that wraps up a day of ora et labora, prayer and work. The chants, echoing off stone walls, are like a balm for the soul, marking the transition from the busyness of the day to the introspection of the night. It's a reminder that, even in the midst of toil, there remains a higher purpose. Now, let's talk about silence, a prized commodity in the monastery. The rule of St. Benedict wasn't just a guide for when to pray or work. It also dictated when to keep your mouth shut. Silence wasn't merely golden, it was practically enshrined. This wasn't because monks had nothing to say, though endless chanting might suggest otherwise, but because silence was seen as a pathway to deeper contemplation. It was about tuning out the noise to tune into the divine. Imagine a time when the loudest thing in your day was a bell, not a blaring car horn or a buzzing smartphone. Yet, for all the silence and introspection, monks weren't entirely cut off from the outside world's din. The monastery was a hub of activity, a place where the sacred and the secular met. Social hierarchy within these walls was as complex as a medieval tapestry. At the top sat the abbot, the spiritual leader, and sometimes a political player, wielding influence that extended far beyond the cloistered walls. Beneath him were the monks, each with roles that mirrored the outside world. From the cellarer managing the provisions to the porter at the monastery gate, each had a job to do. But don't let the holiness fool you. This was no egalitarian utopia. Hierarchies existed, even among those vowed to poverty and humility. Seniority and experience dictated authority, and like any organization, not everyone was thrilled with their lot. Ambition didn't evaporate at the cloister door. It just took on a more pious form. In many ways, monasteries were microcosms of the medieval world, complete with politics, power struggles, and the occasional scandal. Speaking of outside influences, let's not overlook the economic clout monasteries wielded. They were major landowners, with estates that sprawled across the landscape like medieval real estate empires. This wasn't just about spiritual influence. It was about cold, hard cash, or whatever the medieval equivalent was. Monasteries engaged in trade, agriculture, and artisanal crafts, casting a long economic shadow over local communities. They were both landlords and employers, providing a lifeline for peasants who might otherwise be left at the mercy of less charitable feudal lords. Yet, for all their wealth, monasteries were expected to be charitable. They offered alms to the poor, fed the hungry, and provided shelter to travelers. This wasn't just about goodwill, it was about maintaining social order. In a world where the next famine was always around the corner, monasteries served as a safety net. But let's not romanticize it too much. This was also about power. The more people reliant on your charity, the more influence you wielded. Monasteries were savvy operators, balancing their spiritual mission with strategic pragmatism. And what of the monks themselves, those cogs in the monastic machine? For many, the monastery was a calling, a place to pursue a spiritual life free from worldly concerns. But for others, it was a refuge, a place to escape the chaos of the medieval world with its wars, diseases, and unpredictable weather patterns. Joining a monastery was a ticket to stability, where daily rhythms were as predictable as the sunrise, and the focus was on eternal truths rather than temporal troubles. As you reflect on the evening's vespers, it's clear that the monastic life was a unique blend of isolation and engagement, spirituality and practicality. It was a world where silence spoke volumes and contemplation was as vital as bread and ale. The monastery was a sanctuary, yet also a player in the grand medieval game of thrones. It was a place of peace in a world often at war, a beacon of continuity amidst the ever-shifting sands of medieval life. As night falls and the monastery settles into its quiet evening routine, there's a sense of completion, yet also anticipation. Tomorrow will bring another cycle of prayer, work, and contemplation, a rhythm as steady as the heartbeat of monastic life. The silence of the monastery, far from empty, is filled with purpose and meaning. So, as you prepare to retreat into the peace of the cloistered night, remember that in this ancient world, silence is not just the absence of noise, it's the presence of something deeper. And as the world outside spins on in its chaotic dance, here, within these ancient walls, time stands still, offering a moment of reflection and peace in a world that often knows neither. As the monastery cloisters itself in the tranquility of night, let's take a detour from the silence and dive into the intellectual fireworks sparking within these ancient walls. Believe it or not, these monks were the unsung heroes of what many mistakenly call the Dark Ages. If you think the Middle Ages were just about knights, dragons, and damsels in distress, prepare to have your chainmail rattled. Monasteries were the intellectual powerhouses of their day, preserving and propagating knowledge like medieval data centers, minus the Wi-Fi and ergonomic chairs. First, let's bust the myth of the so-called Dark Ages. This term, coined by Petrarch in the 14th century, paints a picture of a Europe intellectually asleep at the wheel, supposedly stumbling in the dark, until the Renaissance flicked on the Enlightenment switch. But here's the twist. While much of Europe was indeed preoccupied with survival, the monastic scribes were busy illuminating manuscripts, both metaphorically and literally. They were the keepers of ancient wisdom, copying texts like Aristotle's works or Roman legal codes at a time when most folks were more concerned with surviving the next harvest or avoiding the latest plague outbreak. In fact, the monastic scriptorium was a hub of cultural preservation. Monks meticulously transcribed not just religious texts, but also scientific treatises, philosophical musings, and even the odd bawdy tale. This wasn't merely a spiritual exercise, it was a lifeline for human knowledge. Imagine, if you will, a monk in the 9th century carefully copying De Rerum Natura by Lucretius, a Roman epic that explains the nature of the universe. Without these scribes, much of our classical heritage might have vanished faster than a medieval ham at a monastery feast. And let's not forget the astounding production numbers. By the 13th century, places like the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland had amassed libraries housing thousands of manuscripts. Sure, they weren't cranking out volumes at the speed of Amazon, but in an era where every letter had to be drawn by hand, this was the medieval version of a bestseller list. These libraries were treasure troves of knowledge, outposts of learning in a world where literacy was as rare as a polite Game of Thrones character. Now, why should you care about a bunch of monks hunched over parchment in dimly lit rooms? Well, without them, the Renaissance might have been more of a minor glow than a full-on blaze of cultural enlightenment. The manuscripts these monks copied and preserved became the foundation upon which the Renaissance thinkers built. Figures like Thomas Aquinas and even Dante Alighieri owe a debt of gratitude to those patient scribes. In a world where the average lifespan was about 35 years, monks were playing the long game, safeguarding knowledge for generations they'd never meet. But the impact of monastic scholarship isn't just an academic footnote. It's the cornerstone of modern education. Fast forward a few centuries, and the monastic schools evolved into the first universities. Places like the University of Bologna, founded in 1088, and the University of Paris, which emerged in the 12th century, owe their existence to the educational frameworks developed in monasteries. They took the monastic model of structured learning and ran with it, eventually shaping institutions that would educate future world leaders and thinkers. And let's talk economics, because, after all, knowledge was power, and that power wasn't free. Monasteries weren't just spiritual havens, they were also economic engines. The fees collected from students and patrons played a significant role in the financial health of these institutions. Think of it as a medieval Kickstarter campaign. You fund the scribes, and in return, you get a slice of intellectual immortality. Not a bad trade-off in a world where most people's main concern was avoiding the next military raid. As the night deepens and the echoes of Compline fade, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of monastic life. Sure, they were places of quiet contemplation, but they were also vibrant centers of learning and cultural exchange. They were, in essence, the medieval version of Silicon Valley, minus the hoodies and stock options. They innovated, preserved, and influenced in ways that have left an indelible mark on modern Europe. The monks, with their vows of poverty, paradoxically enriched the world with knowledge. Their legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern Western thought. From the structured rigors of the scientific method to the very concept of higher education, traces of monastic influence are everywhere. So the next time you log into a virtual class or crack open a textbook, tip your hat to those medieval scribes. They may not have set out to change the world, but change it they did, one painstakingly copied manuscript at a time. And as you settle in for the night, perhaps with a good book or a quiet moment of reflection, consider the monks who, in their quiet devotion, lit a path through the so-called Dark Ages. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the human spirit's relentless quest for understanding. In preserving the past, they paved the way for the future, leaving a legacy as enduring as the stone walls of their monasteries. So here's to the monks, the original custodians of culture, whose silent toil continues to echo through the corridors of history. A reminder that even in the darkest times, knowledge is the light that guides us forward. A world where geniuses are often born in gilded cradles or lofty palaces, Michelangelo Buonarroti's entrance was about as unglamorous as a muddy boot in a marble foyer. Born in 1475 in Capri, Italy, a place that's as unassuming as its name suggests, he was the second of 5 sons in a family whose claim to financial fame could be best described as aspirational. His father, Ludovico di Leonardo Buonarroti Simone, was a magistrate, which sounds impressive until you realize it's a bit like being the mayor of a town where everyone's related. Now, let's set the scene. Renaissance Italy. The streets are buzzing with the hum of commerce, art, and the occasional plague. It was a time when being an artist was less about having a flair for the dramatic and more about surviving the drama of everyday life. Michelangelo, even as a child, was a bit of a square peg in a world of round holes. At the time he was 13, he had convinced his father to let him apprentice under Domenico Ghirlandaio, a master of fresco who was more famous than a TikTok influencer at an art fair. Ghirlandaio wasn't just any artist. He was the kind of guy who could paint a chapel wall faster than you can say Capella Maggia. Michelangelo, however, wasn't exactly the ideal apprentice. He was more interested in the sculptures of ancient Rome than the frescoes of Florence. But hey, you don't become a Renaissance icon by coloring within the lines. It's said that Michelangelo, with the kind of audacity reserved for teenagers and avant-garde artists, would correct his master's sketches. Picture it, a teenager telling a seasoned artist, "Hey, I think you missed a spot." And then there was Lorenzo de' Medici's garden. Michelangelo found himself there thanks to Lorenzo's keen eye for talent, or perhaps his tolerance for youthful antics. Lorenzo, the de facto ruler of Florence and a patron of the arts so influential that he might as well have invented the Renaissance himself, took a liking to Michelangelo. It was in these gardens that Michelangelo honed his skills, surrounded by the remnants of ancient Roman statues and a few marble slabs that seemed to whisper, "Chisel me, you won't." Now, here's a myth worth busting. Michelangelo, the marble prodigy. The romantic legend likes to paint him as a sculptural savant, chiseling masterpieces from day one. But reality, as usual, is more mundane. His early attempts were, let's say, less David and more, oh dear. Marble is unforgiving, and Michelangelo's first sculptures were likely closer to lumpy potatoes than divine figures. But persistence, as every artist knows, is just as important as talent. Michelangelo's career didn't so much take off as it did stumble forward with the grace of a donkey on ice. His first commission, a statue of Hercules, never saw the light of day, which might have been a blessing in disguise. Yet, despite the rocky start, there was something undeniably magnetic about his work. Michelangelo had an eye for detail and a flair for drama that would eventually carve his name into history, quite literally. But back to Lorenzo's garden, where Michelangelo's education was less about formal training and more about absorbing the grandeur of antiquity. It was here that he sculpted the famed Battle of the Centaurs, when he was just around 17. This piece, full of chaotic energy and more muscle than a Mr. Universe contest, caught the attention of Florence's elite. It was like the Renaissance version of going viral. Yet, despite his burgeoning talent, Michelangelo was not without his quirks. He was known for being moody and intense, a real Renaissance brooder. If there was ever a Renaissance equivalent of resting artist face, Michelangelo had it. He preferred solitude and would often be found sketching or sculpting alone, shunning the lively social circles that Florence had to offer, which were as vibrant as a kaleidoscope on steroids. In a city teeming with artists, each vying for a slice of the Medici pie, Michelangelo wasn't just another face in the fresco. His talent was raw, his ambition fierce. He was, as they say, a diamond in the rough, or in his case, a David in a yet-to-be-chiseled slab. While the world would eventually come to recognize him as one of the greatest artists of all time, his early days were marked by the same struggles and setbacks that define every journey toward greatness. So, next time you admire the Sistine Chapel or gaze upon the statue of David, remember this. Michelangelo didn't emerge fully formed from the womb with a chisel in hand. He was shaped by the world around him, by his mentors, his environment, and yes, even by his own stubborn determination. Michelangelo's early life might have been a series of fortunate accidents and bold chances, but it was also a testament to the power of persistence and passion. After all, even the greatest masterpieces start as nothing more than a block of marble and a wild dream. Just as Michelangelo was finding his groove, fate tossed a fresco-sized curveball his way. Enter the Sistine Chapel gig. But before you imagine him leaping at the chance to paint a ceiling like a kid at a candy store, let's set the record straight. Michelangelo was about as thrilled as a cat in a rainstorm. You see, our boy was a sculptor at heart, a man who preferred his art in 3 dimensions, preferably carved out of marble that would make the gods weep. Painting, especially on a ceiling, wasn't exactly his dream job. But when Pope Julius Roman II summons you, you don't exactly RSVP with a thanks, but no thanks. Now, Pope Julius Roman II wasn't just any pope. He was the kind of guy who'd declare war on countries just to redecorate his chapel. Known as the warrior pope, Julius had a reputation for being as subtle as a cannonball. He had grand visions for the Sistine Chapel, and Michelangelo was caught in the crosshairs of this papal ambition. The commission itself was a massive undertaking, covering 12,000 square feet of ceiling with scenes from the Bible. Imagine being asked to wallpaper your entire house with tiny, intricate designs, and you'll have a sense of Michelangelo's predicament. Let's talk about the chaos that ensued once Michelangelo reluctantly accepted the job in 1508. Picture a man who's never frescoed before, tasked with painting an entire ceiling. Michelangelo had to learn on the job, which is like being asked to pilot a plane on your first day at flight school. Oh, and did I mention he had to do it while lying on his back on a scaffold, paint dripping into his eyes? The romantic image of the artist in serene contemplation is about as accurate as a Renaissance GPS. The reality was Michelangelo spent 4 grueling years, from 1508 to 1512, contorted like a human pretzel, painting scenes from Genesis with neck cramps that could rival the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Financial and political pressures were ever present, like an uninvited guest at a dinner party. Pope Julius Roman II was not known for his patience or his budgeting skills. He wanted results, and he wanted them yesterday. The project was expensive, costing the equivalent of millions today, and Julius was footing the bill. This wasn't just about art. It was a statement of papal power, a visual flex to the world. Michelangelo had to deliver and fast, but our artist was no pushover. He had a notoriously tempestuous relationship with the Pope, who would often visit the chapel to check on progress, probably with the same enthusiasm as a parent at a school play, demanding to know why little Timmy hadn't hit his marks. And then there was the infamous nose incident. Ah yes, the story goes that Michelangelo got into a spat with a rival sculptor named Pietro Torrigiano. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and before you knew it, Torrigiano landed a punch that left Michelangelo with a nose that would never quite look the same. It's a tale that's both tragic and slightly comical. Imagine the artist of the century, destined to create the most divine faces in marble, all while sporting a nose that had seen better days. But back to the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo's artistic genius was only matched by his stubbornness. Despite his initial reluctance, he transformed the ceiling into a masterpiece of biblical proportions. Each panel teemed with life, drama, and a touch of Michelangelo's own flair for the theatrical. The creation of Adam, perhaps the most iconic section, features God and Adam almost touching fingertips, a scene that has since been parodied more times than a politician's promise. But beneath the grandeur was a man battling his own limitations, pushing through frustration and fatigue to leave a legacy that would echo through the ages. The Sistine Chapel wasn't just a display of artistic prowess. It was a testament to Michelangelo's resilience. He didn't just paint a ceiling, he revolutionized art. His use of human anatomy, emotion, and movement was light years ahead of its time. He wasn't just depicting biblical stories. He was infusing them with a humanity that spoke to people across centuries. Yet, amidst the glory, it's easy to overlook the personal toll. Michelangelo emerged from those 4 years with a permanent stoop and a disdain for frescoes that probably made him shudder every time he saw a paintbrush. As for Pope Julius Roman II, he got his masterpiece and then some. The chapel stood as a monumental testament to his papacy, a divine endorsement if ever there was one. Financially, the project was a burden, but the payoff was immeasurable. Politically, it consolidated his power, reinforcing his image as not just a warrior but a patron of the arts. The Sistine Chapel wasn't just a work of art. It was a weapon in the papal arsenal, a showcase of the church's dominance and influence. So there you have it, Michelangelo's reluctant masterpiece. A tale of artistic triumph wrapped in a saga of backaches, financial strain, and papal politics. It's a story that reminds us that even the greatest achievements often come at a personal cost. But for Michelangelo, it wasn't just about the art. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible, defying expectations, and in doing so, painting his name in the annals of history, one ceiling panel at a time. But Michelangelo's story doesn't end with paint-splattered ceilings and papal politics. Far from it. Let's pivot from the fresco to the marble, from the Sistine Chapel to the towering figure of David. If the Sistine Chapel was Michelangelo's reluctant magnum opus, then David was his passionate masterwork. Picture a young Michelangelo, fresh off his ceiling escapades, with a gleam in his eye and an itch to sculpt something that would make the guards do a double take. Enter the block of marble, a 17-foot-tall behemoth weighing in at a casual 12,000 pounds. This wasn't just any marble. It was a piece that had been languishing in the workshops of Florence for over 40 years, rejected by other artists like a bad blind date. But where others saw an unwieldy chunk of stone, Michelangelo saw potential, and perhaps a bit of a challenge. It was, after all, the artist's equivalent of climbing Everest without a map. Now, let's address the myth. Michelangelo and the marble were a match made in heaven, right? Not quite. The stone was flawed, narrow, and had been previously hacked at by another sculptor who gave up. Yet, Michelangelo was undeterred. He saw the imperfections as just another hurdle to leap over, the kind of hurdle that would make Olympic athletes wince. His obsession with the human form meant that every chisel strike was deliberate, every detail meticulously planned. He worked tirelessly from 1501 to 1504, turning that awkward block into a masterpiece of anatomical precision. Picture a sculptor so focused that he'd practically become a marble whisperer. And then there's the logistics of moving David through Florence, which was as straightforward as threading a camel through the eye of a needle. Once completed, David needed to be transported from Michelangelo's workshop to its designated spot outside the Palazzo Vecchio. Easy, right? Not exactly. This required a team of 40 men, a complex system of ropes and pulleys, and a whole lot of Florentine ingenuity. They moved the statue a painstaking few inches per day, a process that took an entire week. Imagine the city holding its collective breath, watching this colossal figure lurch through the streets like a dignified parade float. But David wasn't just a showcase of Michelangelo's sculpting prowess. It was a political statement, a symbol of Florentine independence and defiance. Florence, a city that thrived on its self-image as a plucky underdog, saw itself in David, a small but mighty force standing up to the Goliaths of the world. Placed outside the seat of government, David became the emblem of the Republic, a quiet but formidable reminder of the city's resilience against larger powers. It wasn't just a statue. It was Florence's way of flexing its cultural muscles, marble middle finger to anyone who dared challenge its autonomy. Of course, the romantic notion that Michelangelo single-handedly elevated Florence's political narrative through art is tempting, but let's not forget the broader picture. The city was a hotbed of political intrigue and artistic competition, a place where power dynamics shifted more often than the winds off the Arno. The Medici family, Florence's own version of a Renaissance soap opera, had been exiled, and the Republic was keen to assert its dominance. David was the perfect figurehead, a reminder of what they stood for, wrapped in a cloak of artistic genius. And as much as we love the idea of Michelangelo as a lone genius, let's not ignore the economic realities. Creating David wasn't just an artistic endeavor, it was a financial gamble. The marble itself was expensive, and the logistics of moving and installing the statue required significant investment. Florence, ever the city of entrepreneurs, understood the value of art as both a cultural asset and a tourist draw. David was as much an investment in the city's future as it was a nod to its past. The unveiling of David was nothing short of a spectacle. When the statue was finally revealed, it was met with awe and admiration. People flocked to see this new marvel, a masterpiece that seemed to breathe with life despite its stone heart. It said that the sight of David left viewers speechless, and not just because they were craning their necks to take in all 17 feet of him. Michelangelo had achieved something extraordinary. He'd captured the essence of human strength and vulnerability in a single, breathtaking figure. Yet, beneath the surface of this triumph lay the complex interplay of politics, economics, and artistry. David wasn't merely a statue. It was a symbol of a city's ambitions, a reflection of a society poised at the brink of modernity. Michelangelo, with his unparalleled skill and keen eye for the human form, had created more than just a sculpture. He had crafted a legacy, one that would stand tall through the centuries, reminding us all of the power of art to shape both history and identity. And as we leave David standing in the Piazza della Signoria, let's not forget the man behind the chisel. Michelangelo's obsession with the human form wasn't just about anatomical accuracy. It was about capturing the spirit of his subjects, infusing them with life and emotion. His work was a testament to the belief that art could transcend the boundaries of the physical world, bridging the gap between the earthly and the divine. But wait, there's more to Michelangelo's story. Our journey doesn't end here. After all, there are still more masterpieces to discuss, more myths to debunk, and more insights to uncover. Michelangelo's journey was far from over, and neither is ours. So, stay tuned for the next chapter in the life of the man who turned marble into magic, wielding his chisel like a maestro conducts an orchestra. And as our tale of marble magic continues, we pivot to a different kind of stone marvel, the architectural wonders that marked Michelangelo's later years. You see, after chiseling out his legacy with David and painting the Sistine Chapel into the annals of history, Michelangelo decided to swap his sculptor's chisel for an architect's compass. His piece de resistance, the grand dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. If you think that's just another dome, well, hold onto your Renaissance hats, because this is no ordinary architectural feat. Michelangelo took over the project in 1546 at the ripe age of 71, a time when most people would be considering retirement, not embarking on a new career. But Michelangelo was never one to follow convention. St. Peter's Basilica was more than just an architectural challenge. It was a political and religious symbol of monumental proportions. The Basilica was the heart of Christendom, a spiritual beacon that needed to outshine all others. The original design for the Basilica had been started by Donato Bramante, but let's just say the project had stalled more times than a teenager learning stick shift. Michelangelo inherited a sprawling construction site with more blueprints than a conspiracy theorist's basement. But he wasn't there to babysit someone else's vision. Oh no, he had plans of his own. He scrapped Bramante's design, opting for a more simplified, but no less grandiose vision. His dome was to be an awe-inspiring marvel, a feat of engineering genius that would make even the most jaded cardinal utter a prayer of gratitude. Now, let's talk numbers. The dome Michelangelo envisioned was a colossal 448 feet tall, nearly 141 meters for those of you who prefer the metric system. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty, and it wasn't just about reaching for the heavens. The dome's diameter stretched to 138 feet, making it the largest in the world at the time. It was as if Michelangelo was building a marble mountain atop the Vatican, daring God himself to say, "Whoa there, buddy, that's a bit much." But building this architectural marvel wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about maneuvering through the Byzantine politics of the church. Michelangelo had to deal with the papal authorities, a group as fickle and fractious as a medieval reality TV show. And let's not forget the finances. The project was a cash-eating monster, guzzling down the coffers of the Vatican faster than Michelangelo could sketch out his plans. In today's money, the cost of the Basilica would make a billionaire blush. Estimates suggest upwards of $48 million. Despite these challenges, Michelangelo pressed on, driven by an almost divine obsession. He pored over every detail, ensuring the structural integrity of the dome while infusing it with a beauty that could only be described as celestial. Michelangelo's vision was realized posthumously, with the dome completed in 1590, 26 years after his death. It stands today as a testament to his genius and perseverance, a symbol of Rome's spiritual and architectural grandeur. But let's not romanticize too much. Michelangelo's later years weren't all divine inspiration and heavenly architecture. In fact, the man was known for being about as cheerful as a Monday morning. He preferred solitude, often retreating to his workshop like a grumpy hermit. His disdain for social niceties was legendary. Michelangelo would rather wrestle with marble than mingle with society's elite. And then there's the matter of his personal habits, or lack thereof. Michelangelo's hygiene was, let's say, rustic. He was known for wearing his clothes until they practically became a second skin. Bathing was more of an annual event than a daily ritual. In a world pre-deodorant, this was a bold choice, and it left contemporaries wondering if the aroma of genius was owed to Michelangelo. Frugality was another of his quirks, bordering on miserly. Despite his immense talent and fame, Michelangelo lived like he was one poorly placed chisel strike away from financial ruin. He was known to sleep with his boots on, perhaps to save time, or avoid the hassle of lacing them up each morning. This penny pinching was both a product of his upbringing and a reflection of his disdain for material wealth. A bit ironic given he was designing some of the most opulent structures of his time. Still, his grumpiness and frugality didn't tarnish his legacy. If anything, they added layers to the myth of the tortured genius. Michelangelo was a man of contradictions, a solitary figure who created works that drew crowds, a man who shunned wealth but left a legacy worth untold riches. His life was a constant dance between public acclaim and personal struggle, a testament to the complexity of genius. In his later years, Michelangelo's work on St. Peter's Basilica wasn't just about architectural mastery. It was about leaving a legacy that would echo through the ages. The dome wasn't just a feat of engineering. It was a symbol of the Renaissance itself, a bold statement of human achievement and divine inspiration. And so, as we leave Michelangelo in the shadow of the Vatican, still clutching his architectural plans, we're reminded of the man behind the myth. A man who, despite his quirks, his grumpiness, and his questionable hygiene, managed to elevate art and architecture to divine heights. Michelangelo's story isn't just about sculptures and buildings. It's about the struggle, the obsession, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. But don't go anywhere just yet. There's still more to uncover in the life of Michelangelo, more myths to bust, more anecdotes to share. The tale of this Renaissance titan is far from over, and neither is our journey through the annals of art history. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve deeper into the life and legacy of the man who turned stone into stories. So, Michelangelo, the grand maestro of marble and architectural awe, is now firmly entrenched in history's Hall of Fame. But let's not darn our rose-tinted glasses too soon. Behind that legendary status lies a man whose life was as layered as his sculptures. And while the myth of the tortured genius is tempting, let's do what any good historian would. Engage in some myth-busting with a side of reality check. Let's start with the idea that Michelangelo was a tormented soul, forever haunted by the spectre of his own genius. While it's true he was never the life of the Renaissance party, the man wasn't exactly a perpetual storm cloud either. Michelangelo's so-called tortured genius narrative often overlooks his pragmatic side. This was a man who navigated the complex socio-political landscape of Renaissance Italy with the skill of a diplomat. He knew how to play the game, securing commissions from the likes of the Medici and the Vatican. Sure, he had the social skills of a hedgehog, but he was sharp enough to maintain a steady stream of work, ensuring he was never far from another marble block or ambitious architectural project. His work ethic, relentless, doesn't even cover it. Michelangelo was a man who, quite literally, left everything on the table, a table likely covered in sketches, chisels, and the occasional breadcrumb from a long-forgotten meal. Reports suggest he worked until his dying days in 1564, leaving behind an unfinished Pieta, which seems almost poetic. A master still chipping away at the stone, refusing to let mortality dictate the end of his artistic journey. Speaking of 1564, Michelangelo's death marked a seismic shift in the cultural landscape of the time. He passed away at the age of 88, a ripe old age by 16th century standards, in Rome. His death was such a big deal that they moved his body back to Florence for a grand procession, as if the city was saying, yes, he was ours first. It was a testament to his impact that even in death, he was a figure of immense significance. The procession was akin to a state funeral, with the who's who of the Renaissance world paying their respects. His passing was less a closing chapter and more an emphatic exclamation point in the narrative of art history. Culturally, Michelangelo left a legacy that was as much about inspiration as it was intimidation. Artists who followed didn't just aspire to reach his heights, they were practically petrified by them. His works became the benchmark, the standard by which all others were judged. The Sistine Chapel, David, the Dome of St. Peter's. These weren't just artistic achievements, they were declarations of human potential. They told the world that art could transcend the mundane, that it could reach for the divine. But let's not forget the quirky human behind the chisel. Michelangelo, the man, was full of fascinating contradictions. A devout Christian who often tangled with the church, a man of immense wealth who lived like a pauper, and an artist who never married but whose works were like offspring, each with a life of its own. It's in these contradictions that we find the true Michelangelo, not just the legend, but the flawed, brilliant human being. His personality, well, let's just say it was as sculpted as his statues. Michelangelo was known for his fiery temperament and stubbornness. He often clashed with patrons, not least because he had a vision and wasn't about to let anyone mess with it. You could say he had the tenacity of a bulldog with an artistic flair. Yet this same stubbornness fueled his genius, driving him to push boundaries and redefine what was possible in art. In reflecting on Michelangelo's legacy, we're left with a profound appreciation for the man who turned stone into life, who painted ceilings with stories that dance across the heavens. His life is a reminder that genius is rarely a straightforward path. It's a winding road of triumphs and failures, of moments of divine inspiration and human frustration. Michelangelo's story is one of perseverance and passion, of a man who carved his name into history as surely as he carved David from marble. As we wrap up this journey through the life of Michelangelo, imagine him not as just a marble maestro, but as a Renaissance rock star, a man who, despite his quirks and grumbles, left a legacy that continues to inspire and awe. His story is a testament to the power of art to transcend time, to touch the human spirit in ways that defy explanation. So the next time you stand beneath the grandeur of the Sistine Chapel or gaze up at the towering figure of David, remember the man behind the myth, a human who dared to dream in stone and paint, leaving us all the richer for it. The sun peaks over the horizon, and it's time for another day aboard the floating chaos known as a pirate ship. Forget about waking up to the aroma of a fresh brewed espresso. Here, it's the scent of salt, sweat, and maybe a hint of gunpowder to really get those eyes open. Everyone's up with the dawn because the captain doesn't care if you're a morning person or not. He's the one with the hat, after all. First up, the morning routine. Romantic images of pirates living the high life are about to take a nosedive. You know those Hollywood depictions of dashing rogues with shining swords and perfectly aligned teeth? Yeah, not so much. Your morning starts with hardtack, which is basically a biscuit that could double as a brick, and ale, because fresh water isn't exactly on tap in the Caribbean. The hardtack's as tough as your luck, and it's been known to house a few weevils. Consider it extra protein. Now, let's talk about ship hierarchy. It's as structured as a corporate ladder, but with more swearing and fewer neckties. The captain's at the top, obviously, ruling with a mixture of charisma, fear, and the occasional threat of walking the plank. Below him, you've got the quartermaster, the real brains behind the operation, handling discipline and divvying up plunder. Then there are the mates, the carpenters, the gunners, and finally the common sailors, each with their own roles, but all sharing the same cramped, smelly quarters below deck. Despite what you might think, nobody's in it for the fashion or the dental plan. The allure of piracy lies in the potential for riches, though the reality is more often a pocketful of disappointment. During the so-called golden age of piracy, let's peg it between 1650 and 1730. A successful pirate might hope for 20 to 30 pounds in plunder after a good haul. But considering the risk of disease, capture, or just plain old shipwreck, it's a gamble. And those legendary treasures, more often they're crates of sugar and barrels of rum. Not that anyone's complaining about the rum. Now, you might be wondering how these floating wooden fortresses keep going. Ships are high-maintenance divas, requiring constant attention and resources. Repairs are a constant headache, demanding timber for mending hull breaches and sails. And let's not forget the weapons. Cannon maintenance is no small feat, and gunpowder doesn't just grow on trees. Each cannonball costs money, and every time you fire one, you're literally blowing away your profits. Managing captured goods is another logistical nightmare. When you do get a hold of something worthwhile, it needs to be sold in a port that won't ask too many questions. That means dealing with the black market, and shady merchants will try to swindle you faster than you can say pieces of 8. So here you are, in a world where the promise of freedom comes wrapped in the hard realities of life at sea. You're not just battling the waves, you're up against politics, economics, and the occasional bout of scurvy. Welcome to the pirate life, where the fantasy meets the fierce reality head-on, and every day is a wild ride on the high seas. But before you start dreaming of buried treasure and parrots on shoulders, let's navigate to the real world of navigation. Forget those whimsical pirate maps with an X marking the spot. Those are about as real as a mermaid on the payroll. Actual pirates relied on tools that were more advanced than you'd think for the 17th century. Meet the astrolabe and the compass, the pirate's GPS and Google Maps combined, minus the soothing voice and rerouting option. The astrolabe, a sort of medieval protractor, was the gadget of choice for anyone wanting to figure out their position using the stars. Picture it. You're standing on deck, trying not to spill your ale, while fiddling with this brass disc to measure the angle between the horizon and a celestial body. The goal, calculating latitude. Not exactly Pirates of the Caribbean action material, but crucial if you want to avoid becoming fish food. Then there's the compass. This little marvel doesn't just point north. It's the difference between sailing into fortune or into a hurricane. And speaking of hurricanes, let's talk weather. In the Caribbean, the weather is as unpredictable as a pirate's mood after a week on hardtack. One minute you're basking in sunshine, and the next, you're caught in a storm that makes you question your life choices. Forget about checking an app for a forecast. Sailors relied on sky gazing and sea smelling, which is less reliable but way more dramatic. Now, navigating through these waters wasn't just about dodging storms and finding treasure. It was also about playing the social game on board. Pirate ships were floating anarchies, but they ran on a surprisingly democratic system. Enter the Articles of Agreement, the pirates' version of a company handbook, but with more emphasis on plunder and less on casual Fridays. These articles were drawn up by the crew, outlining rules, shares of loot and punishments. Break a rule, and you weren't just getting a stern memo. You might lose an ear, or worse. Discipline was essential because, let's face it, keeping a bunch of unruly sea bandits in line is like herding cats with swords. The quartermaster was the enforcer, the HR manager with a penchant for justice and a sharp cutlass. He ensured that every pirate got his fair share of the loot, which was crucial for maintaining morale. After all, nothing says teamwork like equal opportunity plundering. Despite the allure of freedom, life at sea was a test of endurance. The ship was your world, a wooden island where personal space was a myth and privacy, a luxury you couldn't plunder. The ship's crew was a motley bunch, drawn from all walks of life, former sailors, disgruntled soldiers, and the occasional runaway who found more charm in the prospect of pirate glory than in the drudgery of land-based toil. Oh, and the smell. Imagine a cocktail of salt, sweat, and the occasional whiff of unwashed pirate. Not exactly the breezy ocean vibe you were hoping for, and let's not overlook the health hazards. Scurvy was the silent enemy, sneaking up on unsuspecting pirates who hadn't seen a lemon in years. It's hard to strike fear into the hearts of your enemies when you're missing teeth and your gums look like they're auditioning for a zombie film. Yet, despite these challenges, there was a strange camaraderie on board. Pirates, for all their rough edges, stuck together. When you're facing down the Royal Navy or a rival pirate crew, you need to trust the person next to you with your life and your share of the booty. This was a world where loyalty was bought with blood and treasure, not promises and signatures. But don't get too comfortable in your hammock just yet. The sea is restless, and the horizon is full of possibilities and dangers. There are still more tales to tell, storms to weather, and legends to unravel. So, hold onto your tricorn hat, because the adventure is just getting started. And so, as you hang on to your tricorn hat, eyes scanning the horizon, the afternoon sun signals a shift in the day's agenda. It's time to talk business, the business of piracy, where the stakes are as high as the sea is deep. The hunt for ships to plunder isn't just about spotting a sail and charging in with swords blazing. Nope, that's a one-way ticket to a watery grave. Instead, it's all about strategy, cunning, and a little bit of luck. Let's set the scene. You're not just floating aimlessly, hoping to stumble across a treasure-laden galleon. Oh no, the pirates of the Caribbean had a finely tuned system for picking their targets. They were the original market analysts, sifting through intelligence reports that would make a modern hedge fund manager proud. Pirates often relied on a network of informants, spies, disgruntled sailors, and those shady dark-side tavern keepers who'd sell you their grandmother for a shilling. This intel was crucial for identifying which ships were worth the chase. But what made a ship a good target? It wasn't always about size or visible wealth. Pirates sought out vessels that were rich in cargo but light in defenses. Think of it as a cost-benefit analysis. Maximum plunder, minimum resistance. A Spanish treasure galleon might be tempting, but if it's bristling with cannon and 100 soldiers, it's more trouble than it's worth. Instead, those slow-moving merchant ships, weighed down with sugar, spices, or, jackpot, gold, were far more appealing. After all, you're not looking to reenact a scene from Gladiator on the high seas. Now, let's dive into some numbers. During the early 18th century, a modest merchant ship might carry goods worth anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 pounds sterling, enough to keep a pirate crew in rum and hardtack for quite a while. But the real prize was the occasional shipload of gold and silver from the New World mines. Imagine stumbling upon a Spanish treasure fleet returning from Peru, carrying silver ingots worth upwards of 5 million pesos. That's the kind of haul that could retire a pirate captain to a life of luxury, or at least a slightly more comfortable hammock. Securing such a prize wasn't just about firepower. Pirates were masters of psychological warfare, using their fearsome reputation as a weapon. The Jolly Roger, the that infamous skull and crossbones flag was the 18th century equivalent of a beware of dog sign, except the dog had rabies and a taste for sailors' blood. Raising the black flag was often enough to make a crew surrender without a fight, sparing lives and preserving their cargo. In the pirate business, a reputation for brutality could be more effective than any broadside. But when it came to actual combat, forget the swashbuckling sword fights of Hollywood lore. Naval battles were brutal, chaotic, and over in minutes. Pirates preferred short, decisive engagements. Think of it as the naval version of a bank heist. Get in, grab the loot, and get out before the authorities show up. They relied on speed and surprise, often using small, nimble ships that could outmaneuver larger, slower vessels. The pirate ship's rigging was its secret weapon. It allowed quick adjustments to sails and swift changes in direction, perfect for getting the drop on an unsuspecting merchantman. Yet, despite their fearsome reputation, pirates were practical. If a ship was too well defended, they'd often pass it by, waiting for a softer target. After all, a dead pirate doesn't spend much of his share. This pragmatism extended to their own vessels. Pirates would often modify their ships for speed and firepower, stripping them of unnecessary weight and adding extra cannon. A pirate ship was a floating fortress and a racing yacht combined, designed to catch and overpower its prey. And when the cannonballs did fly, the reality of naval combat was far grittier than any romantic duel. Cannon fire was indiscriminate, splintering wood and tearing sails, sending shards flying like deadly confetti. The sound alone was deafening, a cacophony of explosions and screams. Pirates, often outnumbered and outgunned, relied on their superior seamanship and sheer audacity to carry the day. It was a game of nerves as much as firepower, with the outcome often decided before the first shot was even fired. Then there's the economic side of things. Running a pirate ship was akin to managing a small business, with profits and losses to consider. Cannonballs and gunpowder were expensive, and every shot fired was money literally going up in smoke. The trick was to balance aggression with caution, ensuring that every engagement was cost-effective. A wasted cannonball could mean the difference between a successful raid and a missed opportunity. Now, let's not forget the human element. Pirates were a diverse bunch, drawn from all corners of the world, with varying levels of skill and experience. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge. It required leadership that could unite these disparate elements into a cohesive fighting force. The pirate captain had to be more than just a fearsome fighter. He needed to be a savvy strategist and a charismatic leader, able to inspire his crew with the promise of riches and the thrill of adventure. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows on the deck, you realize that this life, this high-stakes game of cat and mouse on the open sea, is not for the faint of heart. It's a world where freedom and danger are two sides of the same coin, where every decision could lead to glory or disaster. And as the horizon beckons with the promise of the next prize, the pirate's life continues, a never-ending quest for fortune and freedom, played out against the vast, unforgiving backdrop of the Caribbean Sea. And just like that, as the day's adrenaline subsides and the echoes of cannon fire fade, it's time to count the spoils of piracy, a task as thrilling as it is revealing. Now, if you're picturing gold doubloons spilling from chests, you're not entirely wrong, but hold the Hollywood horses for a moment. A pirate's haul was a mixed bag, literally. Sure, there were coins, those shiny tokens of victory, but more often it was a treasure trove of the unexpected. Let's start with the good stuff, coins. Spanish pieces of 8, the Bitcoin of the 17th century, were the international currency of choice. Each one worth about 8 reals. They were the pirates' payday, their hard-earned reward for a successful raid. But it wasn't all silver and gold. You might find some French louis d'or or even the occasional Portuguese escudo, making a pirate's loot bag a veritable numismatist's daydream. And while coins were great for trade, pirates saw value in more than just metal. Enter spices. Nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper, these tiny flavor bombs were worth their weight in gold back in Europe. Imagine trading a pinch of nutmeg for a sheep or a plot of land. Spice was the original flex in the world of commodities, and a chest full of it was like hitting the jackpot. But wait, there's more. Pirates weren't picky. Textiles, tobacco, indigo, and even sugar were all fair game. These were the real moneymakers, the bread and butter of any self-respecting pirate crew. Forget the bling. It was the everyday goods that kept the rum flowing. And speaking of rum, barrels of the stuff were a common prize. Not just for drinking, mind you, though that certainly happened, but as a valuable trade good. In a time when potable water was as scarce as a clean-shaven pirate, rum was liquid currency. It also doubled as a disinfectant, an anesthetic, and let's be honest, a morale booster. Now, let's talk about the pirate economy, which was as robust as it was informal. Barter was the name of the game. Pirates often swapped goods directly, avoiding the pesky complications of currency exchange and customs declarations. A barrel of rum for a crate of gunpowder. Done. A bolt of silk for some fresh fruit to stave off scurvy. Absolutely. These trades were built on networks of trust and reputation, as valuable as the goods themselves. But let's not overlook the real treasure, the democratic process of dividing the loot. Pirates, those anarchic rogues of the sea, were surprisingly egalitarian when it came to divvying up the spoils. After a successful raid, it was time to break out the Articles of Agreement. These were the pirates' constitution, a set of rules that dictated how plunder was shared. Forget the captain walking off with the lion's share. Everyone from the first mate to the lowliest deckhand got a cut, calculated with almost bureaucratic precision. The captain might get 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, and the rest of the crew 1 share each. And here's the real kicker: compensation for injuries sustained during a raid. Lose an arm or a leg, and you weren't just left to fend for yourself. Pirates took care of their own, with compensation for the wounded. Lose an eye, you might get 100 pieces of 8. A limb, maybe 500. This proto-workers' comp system was a practical necessity. A crew that didn't look after its members wasn't a crew for long. With the loot divvied up, it was time for a well-deserved break. And what better way to celebrate than with a pirate party? Forget the stuffy dinner parties of European nobility. This was a raucous affair, a chaotic blend of drinking, singing, and storytelling. The deck transformed into a dance floor, with fiddles and flutes providing the soundtrack. Rum flowed freely, and for a few precious hours, the harsh realities of pirate life melted away in a haze of camaraderie and revelry. But don't let the festivities fool you. Beneath the joviality was a complex social structure, a bond forged in battle and tempered by the sea. These celebrations were more than just a chance to blow off steam. They were an essential part of maintaining the crew's unity and morale. In a world where tomorrow was never guaranteed, they were a reminder of what they were fighting for: freedom, fortune, and the brotherhood of the sea. As the night wore on and the stars took their place in the sky, the laughter echoed across the water, a symphony of defiance and resilience. Pirates, for all their flaws, had carved out a space for themselves in a world that offered them little. They were the outcasts, the rebels, and the dreamers, living by their own rules in a dance with danger that never ended. And as they raised their mugs in a toast to the sea, the wind, and the next adventure, they knew that, come morning, they'd be ready to do it all over again. This world of high-seas adventure, of plunder and peril, was as unpredictable as the ocean itself. It was a life that demanded everything from those who chose it, a constant balancing act between the harshness of reality and the allure of legend. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, it was clear that the pirates' journey was far from over. The sea was calling, the wind was rising, and the horizon was full of promise, a promise that only the bravest would dare to chase. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, it was clear that the pirates' journey was far from over. The sea was calling, the wind was rising, and the horizon was full of promise, a promise that only the bravest would dare to chase. But after a day of high-seas adventure and a night of riotous revelry, what exactly did the end of a pirate's day look like? Spoiler alert, it wasn't all rum and roses. As the stars twinkled above and the last echoes of laughter faded, it was time for the crew to retreat to their not-so-luxurious quarters. Imagine a space where privacy is about as common as fresh fruit, hammocks strung between beams, each one a swinging cradle of exhaustion. Your dreams might be sweet, but the reality is a mix of snores, sea spray, and the occasional scuttle of an unwanted critter. Comfort, that's a myth as tall as the tales of buried treasure. In these cramped quarters, the harsh truths of pirate life crept in like the damp sea air. Health issues were as much a part of the daily grind as the hunt for plunder. Scurvy was the sneaky villain lurking in the shadows, stealing teeth and sapping strength. Without those vital vitamin, sea-packed citrus fruits, Pirates were at the mercy of a disease that made gums bleed and dreams of juicy lemons dance in their heads. And let's not forget the constant threat of infection from battle wounds. A splintered cutlass could lead to a feverish end, far from the glamour of a hero's death. Beyond the physical wear and tear, there was the looming shadow of legal repercussions. Sure, the pirate life promised freedom, but it was freedom laced with risk. Being caught by the authorities meant a swift trip to the gallows. The so-called pirate's justice was anything but just. A fair trial, more like a formality before the hangman's noose. Between 1716 and 1726, the Admiralty courts in England alone sentenced hundreds of pirates to death. The lawmen of the sea weren't interested in your excuses. They were interested in making an example. And what about the notion of retiring gracefully, lounging on a tropical beach with a chest full of loot? Don't get your hopes up. The truth is, most pirates didn't live long enough to consider retirement plans. Even if they did, managing a nest egg wasn't exactly their forte. The rare few who made it to a ripe old age, like the infamous Henry Every, did so under a cloud of paranoia, constantly looking over their shoulders for bounty hunters or former allies turned foes. The fantasy of retiring in luxury was about as real as a mermaid's kiss. So, where does this leave us in the grand saga of piracy, at the crossroads of legend and reality? The romantic image of the swashbuckling pirate, wild and free, endures in books and films, captivating our imaginations. But the truth is a tapestry of grit and grime, woven with hardship and fleeting triumphs. Pirates were rebels, sure, but they were also opportunists, navigating a world dictated by power and survival. Their legacy is a testament to the allure of the outlaw, the eternal appeal of life on the margins. It's a story of resilience and defiance, of men and women who dared to carve their own path, however treacherous. And in the end, maybe that's the real treasure, the enduring spirit of adventure, the call of the sea, and the promise of the unknown. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of distant shores and hidden treasures, remember that the pirate's life was as much a tale of hardship as it was of high adventure. A dance with danger, a gamble with fate, and somewhere between the myth and the reality, the truth of piracy endures, like a ghost ship on the horizon, forever out of reach, yet eternally compelling. In the bustling, dusty heart of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers did their best impression of a never-ending tug-of-war, stood the city of Babylon. Now, before you start picturing towers and gardens, let's dial it back to a more modest era, 1754 BC, to be precise. This was the time when a man named Hammurabi decided to make his mark, not by building wonders, but by laying down the law. By laying down the law, I mean he literally carved over 280 laws into a giant stone stele. Think of it as the original terms and conditions scroll, except you couldn't just click, agree, and move on. Hammurabi wasn't just your average Babylonian king with a penchant for power. He was a guy with a plan, and that plan involved turning Babylon from a city-state to a regional powerhouse. Mesopotamia was a bit like a geopolitical chessboard back then, with city-states like Uruk, and Lagash vying for supremacy. But while others were busy playing checkers, Hammurabi was making a strategic move that would have ripple effects through history. His ambition, coupled with what some might call a dash of megalomania. Hey, it takes a certain ego to think you can single-handedly dictate the rules of society, led to the creation of his famous code. Now, you might be wondering, what drove Hammurabi to chisel out these laws? Was it a divine vision, or just another day at the office? Well, the answer is a bit of both. Hammurabi claimed that the sun god Shamash handed him these laws, which is a pretty solid excuse for anyone questioning his authority. Hey, don't blame me, blame the guy with the radiant crown. But beyond divine intervention, it was about control. In a region where disputes over land, irrigation, and livestock could quickly escalate into full-blown wars, Hammurabi's code offered a semblance of order. It was less about justice, and more about keeping things from descending into chaos. So, what does this legendary code actually say? You might have heard of the eye for an eye bit. It's the catchphrase that's stuck around, probably because it fits so neatly into a tweet. But here's the kicker. While it sounds like some ancient endorsement of revenge, it was actually about proportional justice. The idea was to limit the escalation of retribution, a big deal in a time where grudges could last longer than a Mesopotamian drought. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some beacon of fairness and equality. The code was as hierarchical as a king's banquet seating chart. Different punishments applied to different classes, and if you were a slave, well, let's just say the odds weren't exactly in your favor. Speaking of harsh realities, let's debunk a myth or two. The Code of Hammurabi is often romanticized as the foundation of modern justice systems. While it did set some precedents, like the presumption of innocence, it wasn't exactly a bastion of human rights. The Code was more about protecting assets and social order than individual freedoms. If you think modern legal jargon is tough, try wrapping your head around a law that says if a builder constructs a house and it collapses, killing the owner's son, the builder's son shall be put to death. Talk about a brutal warranty policy. The creation of these laws wasn't just a local affair. Hammurabi's reach extended across a vast territory. We're talking about an area that stretched from modern-day Iraq to parts of Syria. The guy was nothing if not ambitious. His laws had to address everything from agricultural practices to the price of beer. You know, the essentials. And yes, there was a law about beer. If a tavern keeper overcharged a customer, she was to be thrown into the water. Seems excessive for a bad pint, but in a time when beer was safer to drink than water, it was serious business. So, as you lay there, pondering the intricacies of ancient justice, remember that Hammurabi's code was less about creating a utopia and more about managing a kingdom with a firm hand. In a world where loyalty could be as fickle as the Mesopotamian weather, having a clear set of rules was Hammurabi's way of saying, "Hey, I've got this." And while we might not take all of his laws to heart today, the fact that we're still talking about them means he achieved his goal, a legacy carved in stone, literally and figuratively. Now, while we're on the topic of Hammurabi's legacy, let's peel back the layers on some of those 282 laws etched into stone. Prepare for a deep dive into the nitty-gritty of ancient Babylonian life, where property disputes, family matters, and trade transactions were laid out with the precision of a lawyer channeling their inner scribe. If you think modern contracts are a headache, imagine navigating these laws without a search function. Firstly, let's talk property. In the land of Babylon, real estate was the cornerstone of power, wealth, and apparently an endless source of squabbles. Law number 42, for instance, dealt with the sale of land. If a man rented a field and neglected to till it, he had to pay the owner the produce equivalent of the field's yield. So, no phone-it-in farming here, thanks. This wasn't just agriculture. It was an early lesson in accountability. And if you think landlord-tenant disputes today are tricky, Hammurabi had it covered with a level of detail that would make a modern-day property lawyer weep, both from admiration and sheer exhaustion. Now, trade, the lifeblood of Babylon's economy, had its own set of rules. Law number 104 required a merchant to give a receipt for a transaction. It's like the original no receipt, no refund policy, a local merchant's insurance against the timeless art of haggling gone awry. And while we're on the topic of trade, there was a law that stipulated if a man gave silver to a merchant as a deposit and the merchant went bankrupt, the depositor was to be compensated from the merchant's remaining assets. Sounds familiar? It's like the ancient Mesopotamian version of a bankruptcy court, only with fewer lawyers and more clay tablets. Family life, on the other hand, was a bit more, let's say, complex. Take law number 129. If a wife was caught in the act of adultery, she and her lover were to be bound and thrown into the river. Harsh, absolutely. But it speaks volumes about the societal norms of the time, norms that were more about preserving honor than ensuring fairness or equality. And speaking of fairness, law number 195 is a kicker. If a son struck his father, his hands would be cut off. Talk about tough love. These laws paint a picture of a society where family dynamics were regulated with the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, orderly, if not exactly compassionate. The Code of Hammurabi was all about maintaining social order, often through brutal means. It makes you wonder if Hammurabi was more of a benevolent ruler or a medieval micromanager. Sure, he might have advertised himself as a shepherd to his people, but his approach was less about gentle guidance and more about wielding a very big stick. One might even say his laws were the ancient world's equivalent of an ironclad social contract, with Hammurabi holding the pen and the sword. One of the most fascinating aspects of these laws is how they reflect the economic and social realities of the time. For instance, law number 215 dealt with medical malpractice. If a doctor performed a major surgery and the patient died, the doctor's hands would be cut off. It's a far cry from today's malpractice insurance, but it sure kept the surgeons on their toes, literally. And let's not forget the law about boat rental, where the renter was responsible for returning the vessel in good condition or else pay the full cost of the boat. Clearly, the concept of liability was alive and well in the ancient world. Despite the harshness, these laws provided a framework for what we now call civil society. They encapsulated everything from economic transactions to personal conduct, aiming to curb chaos in a land where unpredictability was as common as the sunrise. And while Hammurabi was no saint, his code was revolutionary for its time, setting a precedent that law should be written, transparent, and accessible, if you could read, that is. Now, before we wrap up this whirlwind tour of ancient legal intricacies, let's debunk the myth of Hammurabi as the father of justice. Sure, his code was a step towards a more orderly society, but it was far from fair by modern standards. The laws favored the wealthy and powerful, with harsher penalties for those lower on the social ladder. It's a stark reminder that while the tools of justice have evolved, the scales have often tipped in favor of those at the top. So, as we pause in our journey through the annals of Babylonian law, remember that the Code of Hammurabi was less a beacon of justice and more a reflection of the era's stark realities. It was a world where laws were not just guidelines, but the very foundation of survival. And while we might chuckle at the absurdities and harshness of these ancient rules, they also serve as a testament to humanity's long-standing quest to bring order to chaos, even if it sometimes meant carving it in stone. As we dive deeper into the intricate web of Hammurabi's laws, it's clear that his code wasn't just a collection of rules. It was a blueprint for a society teetering on the fine line between order and chaos. Now, let's switch gears from the legal quirks to the economic implications of these ancient edicts. The Code of Hammurabi was essentially a tool to stabilize Babylon and boost trade, and believe it or not, some laws were surprisingly ahead of their time. Others, however, were as progressive as a stone wheel. Here's the scoop. Hammurabi's Babylon was a bit like the Wall Street of the ancient world. Trade was the lifeblood, and a stable economy was crucial for Babylon to flourish amidst its patchwork of rival city-states. To put it bluntly, Hammurabi was setting the stage for a thriving commercial hub. By enacting laws that governed everything from interest rates to professional contracts, he was essentially saying, let's make Babylon great for business. For instance, take law number 100. If a merchant lent grain, the debtor had to repay with interest, but if the debtor faced crop failure, the interest was waived. That's right, folks. Debt relief existed long before modern bankruptcy laws. It was a rudimentary form of economic stimulus, designed to keep the wheels of commerce turning even when the harvest guards were having an off year. But here's where it gets interesting. While Hammurabi was busy ensuring that trade and commerce were well-oiled machines, not everyone reaped the benefits. The societal hierarchy was as rigid as a Babylonian clay tablet. At the top, you had the Awilu, the free landowning class. These folks were the ones who could lend grain, hire labor, and generally enjoy the perks of Babylonian citizenship. Below them were the Mushkanu, the free but landless individuals who had rights but lacked the power that came with property ownership. And then you have the Wardu, the slaves, whose rights were about as robust as a sandcastle in a flood. Now, let's talk numbers to paint a clearer picture. In Babylon, a skilled laborer could expect to earn about 6 shekels per month, while a slave was lucky to see even a fraction of that. This economic stratification wasn't just about income disparities. It was a structural divide codified in law. For instance, if a free man struck another free man, the fine was 60 shekels. But if the offender was a slave, well, the punishment was a few lashes and the loss of a limb. Talk about a justice system that's a bit heavy-handed, literally. Despite its harshness, the Code of Hammurabi introduced some regulations that were surprisingly forward-thinking. Take law number 213. If a physician healed a broken bone or severe wound, he was entitled to 5 shekels from the wealthier patient, but only 3 from the Mushkanu. It was a sliding scale of sorts, an embryonic nod to progressive taxation based on ability to pay. This was Hammurabi's way of ensuring that essential services were accessible, albeit in a rudimentary form, to more than just the elite. It wasn't universal healthcare, but in a society where a bad papyrus cut could spell doom, it was something. And then there's agriculture, the beating heart of Babylon's economy. Law number 48 showed Hammurabi's understanding of the agricultural cycle's unpredictability. If a farmer couldn't pay his debt due to a natural disaster, the debt was forgiven for that year. This wasn't just benevolence, it was practical. After all, dead farmers can't pay taxes, and barren fields don't fill granaries. Hammurabi was crafting an early economic safety net, ensuring that Babylon's breadbasket remained bountiful. But not every law was a stroke of economic genius. Some were downright draconian. Take law number 53, for instance. If a man neglected to maintain his irrigation canal and it flooded a neighbor's field, he had to compensate for the loss. Fair enough, right. But if he couldn't pay, he was sold into slavery. That's Hammurabi's version of a water bill with a side of indentured servitude. It illustrates the stark reality that while the code sought to impose order, it often did so with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The economic implications of Hammurabi's laws were a mixed bag, benefiting some while leaving others high and dry. It was a system that favored those already perched atop the social ladder. The wealthy got wealthier, and the poor, well, they mostly stayed poor. Yet, by establishing a comprehensive legal framework, Hammurabi was laying the groundwork for an economy that could thrive amidst the uncertainty of ancient Mesopotamia. In the grand tapestry of history, the Code of Hammurabi stands as a unique blend of pragmatism and harshness, a testament to humanity's perpetual struggle to balance order and justice, fairness and power. While it's tempting to romanticize these ancient laws as the forerunners of modern legal systems, the reality is that they reflected a world where economic and social divides were as immutable as the stone they were carved into. And as we continue to unravel the layers of Hammurabi's legacy, it's crucial to remember that while the code was a step towards societal stability, it was also a stark reminder of the inequities that have long plagued human civilization. And so, the curtain rises on the next act of our ancient legal drama, the legacy of the Code of Hammurabi, a stone-cold collection of do's and don'ts that managed to echo far beyond the dusty corridors of Babylon. Think of it as the legal equivalent of a classic rock album. It never really goes out of style, even if some of the tracks are questionable by today's standards. Now, let's set the stage. Babylon, under Hammurabi's rule, was a veritable hotbed of legal innovation, or at least that's the story we like to tell. The truth is, while Hammurabi's code was groundbreaking for its time, it didn't exactly rewrite the legal playbook for the rest of the world. Instead, it served as a kind of prototype, a primitive blueprint that other civilizations would adapt, tweak, and sometimes outright borrow from as they saw fit. Take the Hittites, for example. By the 16th century BC, they were strutting around Anatolia with their own set of laws, which had more in common with Hammurabi's code than you might expect. They borrowed the eye for an eye principle, but softened the blow a bit, sometimes literally. Instead of cutting off a hand, they just slap you with a fine. The Hittites were like the remix artists of the ancient Near East, taking Hammurabi's greatest hits and adding their own spin. And then there were the Assyrians, who took a page out of Hammurabi's book, perhaps a bit too literally. Their laws, etched into clay tablets in the 14th century BC, were like the director's cut of Hammurabi's code, complete with extra scenes of brutality. They ramped up the penalties, particularly for women, making Hammurabi's laws look like a gentle nudge by comparison. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the code's influence across the Near East, its direct impact on modern law is about as real as a Babylonian unicorn. The notion that Hammurabi's code is the ancestor of Western legal systems is mostly a historical tall tale. Sure, it introduced concepts like written law and proportional justice, but the actual lineage from Babylon to today's legal systems is murkier than the Euphrates after a flood. For one, the Greeks and Romans, those heavyweights of Western legal tradition, were more influenced by local customs and their own homegrown ideas than by anything that came out of Babylon. Roman law, which forms the backbone of many modern legal systems, was more about contracts and property rights than the moral and social codes Hammurabi set in stone. Yet, despite the historical disconnect, Hammurabi's code continues to pop up in pop culture like an ancient legal cameo. It's the Goda reference for portraying harsh justice in everything from textbooks to TV dramas. Ever notice how many dystopian stories feature draconian laws? That's Hammurabi's legacy in a nutshell, minus the historical accuracy, but full of dramatic flair. Remember the infamous eye for an eye bit? It's become shorthand for revenge narratives in everything from spaghetti westerns to superhero blockbusters. It's a catchy line that sticks around, despite the fact that its original intent was more about preventing blood feuds than inciting them. In pop culture, Hammurabi's laws are like the original tweetable content, short, impactful, and often taken out of context. Let's not forget the sheer audacity of Hammurabi's vision. His insistence on a written code laid a foundation for the idea that laws should be transparent and accessible, a concept that would eventually wind its way into the core of democratic societies. It was Hammurabi's way of saying, "I'm the boss, but here's why," a move that put him a step ahead of the average despot with a penchant for arbitrary rule. Fast forward to modern times, and you'll find Hammurabi's code framed as a historical artifact in museums, admired for its age and audacity, if not for its fairness. It's become a symbol, a testament to humanity's long-standing quest to impose order on chaos, a quest that's as relevant today as it was millennia ago. But let's not kid ourselves. While Hammurabi's laws were a step toward civilization, they were no utopia. They were a product of their time, reflecting a society where the weight of justice often fell unevenly, favoring the powerful over the powerless. Yet, they also remind us that the pursuit of justice, however flawed, is a journey worth taking, even if it means occasionally getting lost along the way. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of Hammurabi's legacy, we're reminded that while his code may not have directly shaped our legal systems, its influence lingers in the collective memory of civilization. It's a story of ambition, power, and the eternal human struggle to bring order to the chaos of existence. And as we dig deeper into the annals of history, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next chapter of this ancient saga. Because if there's one thing Hammurabi taught us, it's that the past has a funny way of sticking around, whether carved in stone or tucked into the pages of history. As we dig deeper into the annals of history, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next chapter of this ancient saga. Because if there's one thing Hammurabi taught us, it's that the past has a funny way of sticking around, whether carved in stone or tucked into the pages of history. So, why are we still so fixated on Hammurabi's code, a document that's more Game of Thrones than good governance? Why does this ancient handbook of harsh justice continue to fascinate us, when its brutal edicts seem better suited to a dystopian novel than a model society? Well, for starters, it's because Hammurabi's code is a timeless tale of power, control, and the eternal human struggle to impose order on chaos, traits that resonate across the ages. We love a good story about a leader who dared to lay down the law, even if that law sometimes involved a little too much laying down of people. It's the kind of historical drama that brings out our inner armchair historians, pondering what makes a society tick and how governance can wield both justice and injustice in equal measure. At its core, Hammurabi's code reveals a lot about human nature. It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice has always been a balancing act between fairness and authority, compassion and control. The code's enduring appeal lies in its audacity. It was an attempt to bring order to a world teetering on the edge of chaos. And while it might not have been fair by today's standards, it was a step towards something resembling civilization, a way to prevent Babylon from descending into anarchy. In that sense, it's a bit like the original social contract, albeit one where the terms were dictated by the guy with the biggest stick and the chisel. But let's not sugarcoat it. The code was also a reflection of its time, with all the brutal realities that entailed. It's easy to romanticize Hammurabi as a wise king dispensing justice, but in truth, his laws were as much about maintaining his grip on power as they were about fairness. The code was a tool of control, designed to keep the king's subjects in line and the king's kingdom intact. It was less about creating a utopia and more about avoiding chaos, a noble goal, but one that often came at a high cost. Despite the harsh realities, there's a certain allure to the idea of a singular, all-encompassing code that governed every aspect of life. In a world where modern laws can be as confusing as a Babylonian clay tablet, the simplicity of Hammurabi's code has a certain appeal. Sure, it was brutal, but it was also clear-cut, leaving little room for interpretation or loopholes, qualities that are sometimes lacking in today's legal systems. But why do these ancient laws continue to captivate us, despite their sometimes brutal enforcement? It's because they offer a window into the past, a glimpse of a world where life was governed by rules that seem both familiar and foreign. They remind us that the quest for justice is an age-old pursuit, one that has evolved over millennia but still grapples with the same fundamental questions. How do we balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the community? How do we ensure that justice is served, even when it's not always fair? And how do we reconcile the sometimes harsh realities of law with our ideals of what justice should be? In a way, Hammurabi's code is a mirror, reflecting not just the society that created it, but also our own modern struggles with justice and governance. It challenges us to consider how far we've come, or haven't, in our quest for a just society. And as we sit here, musing over the legacy of a long-dead king and his stone-clad laws, we're reminded that the past is never really gone. It lingers in our collective consciousness, shaping our understanding of justice and governance, even as we strive to do better. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Hammurabi's legacy, let's take a moment to reflect on how far we've come since those ancient days in Babylon. Sure, we've traded clay tablets for digital ones, and our laws are more nuanced than a simple eye for an eye. But the fundamental challenges of governance remain. How to create a system that is fair, just, and equitable for all. It's a quest that's as old as civilization itself, and one that continues to evolve with each passing generation. In the end, Hammurabi's code is both a relic of a bygone era and a reminder of the timeless nature of the human quest for order. It's a story of ambition, power, and the eternal struggle to bring justice to a world that's often anything but just. And as we move forward, let's carry with us the lessons of Hammurabi's legacy, using them to guide our own journey toward a more just and equitable society. And there you have it. Hammurabi's code, a stone-cold reminder that the past has a way of sticking around, influencing our present and shaping our future. As we close the book on this ancient tale, let's keep in mind that history is often less about the facts and more about the stories we tell ourselves. And while Hammurabi's code might not have directly shaped our modern legal systems, it's a testament to the enduring power of law, justice, and the human spirit's relentless pursuit of order in a chaotic world. So next time you find yourself pondering the complexities of justice, remember old Hammurabi and his audacious attempt to carve order into chaos. Because while we've come a long way since those dusty days in Babylon, the echoes of the past still resonate, reminding us that the quest for justice is a journey without end. And as we continue on that journey, let's strive to learn from the past, even as we carve out our own path toward a fairer, more just world. Ever wonder why that jingling in your pocket all started in one corner of the world? Let's unravel the story behind the kingdom of Lydia, the ancient birthplace of coinage, nestled in what we now call Western Turkey. Lydia wasn't some backwater where people sat around twiddling their thumbs until they invented money. No, this was a land of action, strategically perched between major civilizations like the Greek cities to the west and the Persian Empire to the east. It was like living in a historical Grand Central Station, with all the hustle and bustle you'd expect. Lydia's geographical setup was like a VIP seat at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. If you wanted to transport goods from the Aegean Sea to the interior of Asia Minor, Lydia was your go-to highway. This meant a constant flow of traders, ideas, and, let's not forget, the occasional army. The fertile valleys of the Hermus and Meander rivers made sure the Lydians could grow their own food, and then some. Add in the rolling hills and mountains peppered with rich deposits of gold and silver, and you've got yourself a kingdom with a serious economic edge. Now, let's tackle the myth of Lydia as some sleepy, isolated kingdom. The truth couldn't be more different. Lydia was buzzing with trade connections, thanks to its strategic location. Think of it as the original Silicon Valley of the ancient world, but instead of tech startups, they were launching economic revolutions. The Lydians were savvy traders, dealing in textiles, pottery, and that all-important bling, precious metals. It was this wealth of natural resources, especially the gold from the Pactolus River. Yes, the one King Midas supposedly touched, that set the stage for coinage. This river was a literal gold mine, and the Lydians knew how to make it work for them. Speaking of King Midas, let's debunk a little myth. While the story of his golden touch is a delightful tale, it's worth noting that it was the Lydians, not Midas, who turned gold into a true economic powerhouse. By the 7th century BCE, they had figured out how to standardize lumps of metal into coins, a move that would forever change the way humans handle money. This was no small feat. Before coins, trade was a clunky business of bartering goods, which meant you had to carry around a cartload of chickens if you wanted to buy a new toga. Coins simplified everything, making trade more efficient and less, well, feathery. Let's pause here for a moment to appreciate the sheer brilliance of this innovation. Coins were a game changer because they allowed for precise measurement of value. A coin was portable wealth, freeing you from the tyranny of barter. You could finally go to the market without needing a pack mule to carry your exchange goods. And this wasn't just clever bookkeeping. It was a leap in economic thinking, a step toward modern economies where abstract concepts like credit and debt could flourish. But why did Lydia, of all places, come up with this? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and Lydia's bustling trade network demanded a more streamlined way of handling transactions. Plus, having access to abundant natural resources didn't hurt. The Lydians leveraged their geographical and economic position with precision, transforming what could have been just another kingdom into a commercial powerhouse. And let's not forget the social and political factors. Lydian kings were not just sitting on their piles of gold. They were engaged in diplomacy, warfare, and expansion. They needed an efficient way to pay soldiers and manage state finances. Coinage was an elegant solution, turning the Lydian treasury into a bank that could fund whatever escapades the king dreamed up next. So, let's raise a hypothetical glass to Lydia, the little kingdom that could. By turning shiny rocks into the world's first coins, they laid the groundwork for economies everywhere to thrive. And let's remember, the next time you toss a coin into a fountain for luck, you're participating in a tradition that started over 600 years ago, thanks to some savvy Lydians living in a bustling, strategically situated crossroads of the ancient world. Now, with the stage set and coins jingling in our pockets, let's zoom in on the man who catapulted Lydia from a quaint corner of Anatolia into the dazzling spotlight of regional power, King Gyges. Imagine a time when Lydia was just another contestant in the chaotic Game of Thrones in the ancient world. Enter Gyges, the king who didn't just play the game. He changed the rules altogether. Ruling from around 687 to 652 BCE, Gyges was the original power broker, a kind of ancient political maestro orchestrating alliances and expansion with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. So, how did Gyges pull off this transformation? Well, part of his strategy was pure political savvy. He knew when to shake hands and when to shake things up. By marrying into the ruling dynasty of Lydia, Gyges didn't just secure his throne. He strengthened his claim and forged a powerful network of alliances. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of acquiring a tech startup to get the cutting-edge talent and connections. Gyges was not a man to let an opportunity pass by, and he was certainly not afraid to roll the dice when it came to power. One of his most significant moves was aligning Lydia with the mighty Assyrian Empire. Now, this was no small feat. The Assyrians were the big kids on the block, with a reputation that could make a Spartan warrior think twice. By aligning with Assyria, Gyges essentially bought himself a VIP pass to the big league, gaining protection and political clout in exchange for tribute. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat them, join them, and Gyges played it to perfection. This alliance not only kept Lydia safe from Assyrian aggression, but also gave Gyges the breathing room to focus on expanding his influence closer to home. But let's not get too starry-eyed about Gyges' diplomatic genius. The truth is, his path to power wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Enter the legend of the magic ring, a story so intriguing that it could rival any modern-day thriller. According to Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, Gyges wasn't born with a silver spoon, but rather stumbled upon a magic ring that granted him the power of invisibility. Now, while the idea of a cloak-and-dagger king with a magical accessory sounds like the stuff of fantasy, it's crucial to separate fact from fiction. This tale, likely spiced up over centuries, was more about illustrating Gyges' cunning nature than recording historical events. Reality check. Gyges rose to power through a coup, not conjuring tricks. He reportedly killed King Candles, whose confidence in Gyges was clearly misplaced. It was a brutal, calculated move that set the tone for his reign. If there's one lesson here, it's that in the cutthroat world of ancient politics, nice guys definitely finished last. Gyges' coup was a stark reminder that power in ancient Lydia wasn't handed over with a polite handshake and a crown. It was seized, often through blood and betrayal. Once Gyges had his hands firmly on the reins of power, he wasted no time in consolidating his gains. He embarked on military campaigns to expand Lydia's borders, securing control over neighboring territories. This wasn't just about flexing military muscle. It was about securing valuable resources and trade routes. Under Gyges' leadership, Lydia grew into a formidable entity, capable of holding its own against more prominent empires. He understood that economic prosperity was tied to military strength, and he played both angles like a maestro conducting a symphony. Now, here's where things get interesting. Gyges wasn't just about swords and soldiers. He knew full well that economic power was just as critical as military might. He capitalized on Lydia's rich resources, particularly gold, to bolster the kingdom's wealth. The Pactalis River, shimmering with its fabled gold, was more than a fairy tale treasure chest. It was a practical asset that fueled Lydia's economy and enabled Gyges to finance his ambitions. With a steady flow of gold, Lydia could mint coins, pay soldiers, and trade with distant lands, further cementing its status as a burgeoning economic powerhouse. But let's not forget the human element in this saga. Gyges was a master of optics, keenly aware of the importance of image and reputation. By portraying himself as a legitimate and powerful ruler, despite his controversial ascent, he maintained stability within Lydia and deterred potential usurpers. It's a classic lesson in leadership. Sometimes, perception is as crucial as reality. As we peel back the layers of Gyges' reign, it's clear that he was a man of many faces, a shrewd diplomat, a ruthless tactician, and a visionary leader. His legacy set the stage for future Lydian kings, who would build upon his foundations and continue to push the boundaries of what Lydia could achieve. Yet, as with all historical figures, there's a degree of myth that surrounds Gyges, blurring the lines between legend and reality. So, next time you find yourself pondering the origins of that coin in your pocket, remember that it wasn't just minted from gold and silver. It was shaped by the ambitions, alliances, and cunning of leaders like Gyges, who transformed Lydia from a humble kingdom into a beacon of economic and military might. In the grand chessboard of history, Gyges was a player who knew how to make every move count, setting the stage for a legacy that would echo through the ages. And as we continue to explore the rise of Lydia, we'll see how the groundwork laid by Gyges paved the way for even greater achievements and challenges in the kingdom's storied history. And speaking of legacies, enter King Croesus, the Lydian ruler whose name became synonymous with unimaginable wealth. If you've ever heard the phrase rich as Croesus, you can thank this guy. Croesus wasn't just rich. He was the ancient equivalent of a billionaire tech mogul with a fleet of private jets and a penchant for innovation. But instead of building rocket ships, Croesus's contribution to the world was a little more grounded, literally. He was the visionary behind Lydia's economic revolution through coinage, setting a standard that would reverberate through history like the opening chord of a rock ballad. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how Croesus and his team of metal wizards turned lumps of precious metal into coins that jingled all the way from the Aegean to the edges of the known world. First up, the materials. The Lydians used an alloy called electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver that had a pleasing glow and enough heft to feel valuable. This wasn't just some arbitrary choice. Electrum's unique composition made it difficult to counterfeit, a fact that didn't escape the keen eyes of ancient traders. The minting process itself was a marvel of ancient engineering. Picture a time when the phrase, "money doesn't grow on trees," could be countered with, "but it does come from a forge." The Lydians employed a technique called striking, which involved placing a blank piece of electrum between two engraved dies and giving it a good whack with a hammer. The result, a coin with a standardized design and weight, ready to facilitate commerce like never before. In terms of design, the Lydians opted for simplicity and power. The earliest coins bore images of a lion, a symbol of strength and royalty, often paired with a bull, representing wealth and fertility. These symbols weren't just chosen for their aesthetic appeal, they were a message to anyone who laid eyes on them. This is Lydian currency. The coins seem to roar. Use it and prosper they did. Coins quickly became a hit among traders for reasons as practical as they were revolutionary. First off, coins were portable. No more lugging around sacks of grain or herds of goats to negotiate a fair trade. You could fit a day's worth of transactions in a pocket, freeing up ancient arms for more important matters, like carrying amphorae of wine. But the magic of coinage went beyond mere convenience. Coins introduced a level of economic abstraction that was downright futuristic. For the first time, value wasn't tied to a physical object, but to a number stamped on a piece of metal. This mental shift allowed for the birth of concepts like savings, investment, and yes, even taxation. Coins made it possible to accumulate wealth in a form that was both tangible and universally recognized, a fact that didn't go unnoticed by merchants, rulers, and tax collectors alike. Now, let's talk about why Lydia, nestled in the bustling hub of Asia Minor, was the perfect birthplace for this economic revolution. Its strategic position between the Greek world and the vast Persian Empire meant it was already a thriving center of trade and innovation. The introduction of coinage only amplified Lydia's role as an economic powerhouse, attracting traders from across the ancient world eager to take part in this new, more efficient form of commerce. The ripple effects of Lydian coinage were profound. As coins spread, so did the idea that wealth could be standardized, measured, and traded. Greek cities quickly adopted the practice, followed by the Persians, and eventually the Romans. Coins became the lingua franca of ancient trade, a universal language that transcended borders and cultures, uniting disparate economies in a network of exchange that would define the classical world. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of shiny metal discs and cross-cultural trade. There's a harsh reality to this story too. The introduction of coinage also marked the beginning of economic inequality on a scale previously unseen. While coins democratized trade to some extent, they also concentrated wealth and power in the hands of those who controlled their production. In Lydia, that meant the king and his inner circle, who effectively held the keys to the kingdom's economic engine. Sure, coins made it easier to pay soldiers and fund government projects, but they also laid the groundwork for systems of debt and taxation that have been the bane of taxpayers ever since. And speaking of taxes, let's not forget one of Croesus's less glamorous legacies, the introduction of taxation as a formalized, coin-based system. This wasn't just about collecting revenue, it was about consolidating power. By requiring taxes to be paid in coins, Croesus ensured that his subjects were deeply invested in the economic system he controlled. It was a clever move, one that ensured loyalty, or at least compliance, from his subjects. Now, if you're picturing Croesus as some kind of Scrooge McDuck character diving into piles of electrum coins, you're not entirely off the mark. Croesus's wealth was indeed legendary, and he wasn't shy about flaunting it. His palace at Sardes was a testament to opulence, filled with treasures from across the known world. But let's not mistake wealth for complacency. Croesus was a ruler with vision, keenly aware that his kingdom's prosperity hinged on innovation and adaptability. As we wrap up this chapter of Lydia's storied past, one thing is clear. Croesus's economic revolution wasn't just about making money. It was about changing how people thought about money. It was about setting standards for trade and commerce that would endure long after the last Lydian coin had vanished from circulation. And as we move forward in our exploration of Lydia's history, we'll see how Croesus's innovations laid the foundation for even greater challenges and triumphs, as the kingdom navigated the complex world of ancient geopolitics and economics. So, as you ponder the origins of the coins in your pocket, remember that they carry a legacy far richer than the metal they are made of. They are the descendants of a revolutionary idea born in the fertile valleys of Lydia, nurtured by the ambitions of kings who dared to rewrite the rules of commerce. And as we continue to unravel the threads of Lydian history, we'll see how this small but mighty kingdom left an indelible mark on the tapestry of human civilization. Stay tuned, because the story of Lydia is far from over. As the Lydian legacy clinks forward in our tale, let's dive into how this kingdom's newfound bling transformed not only their own fortunes, but those of their neighbours. Imagine being a neighbouring king or merchant catching wind of Lydia's coin-based economy. It was akin to watching your neighbour roll up in a shiny new sports car while you were still saddling up the family mule. Envy, absolutely, but also a hefty dose of admiration. Lydia's shimmering success story was a siren call for alliances and rivalries alike. First, the envy. Lydia's wealth was a magnet for attention, and not all of it was friendly. Nearby powers like the Greek city-states and the ever-expanding Persian Empire looked at Lydia like a juicy steak, and who wouldn't want a bite? Lydia's prosperity was fueled by those electrum coins, and it wasn't long before others wanted to mint their own versions. The Greeks, with their penchant for innovation, quickly followed suit. They saw the practicality, the sheer genius of the coinage system, and decided to get in on the action. By the 6th century BCE, the Greek world was minting its own coins, with designs as varied and vibrant as their city-states. But imitation wasn't just flattery, it was a strategic move. Coins made trade more efficient, and efficiency meant power. Greek city-states like Athens and Corinth embraced this economic evolution, and soon their own economies were buzzing with the benefits of standardized currency. This shift wasn't just about commerce, it was a social game changer. Suddenly, markets could expand, goods could flow more freely, and economies could grow in ways that would have been unimaginable in a barter-based system. Yet these coins also served as a constant reminder of Lydia's pioneering role, a testament to the spark of envy that had ignited this economic wildfire. On the flip side, Lydia's wealth and innovation also invited admiration and alliances. Picture a world where trade routes crisscrossed ancient lands like modern highways. Lydia's central position made it a bustling hub, akin to a historical Times Square, illuminated not by neon signs, but by the gleam of precious metal. This strategic location turned Lydia into an ancient melting pot, drawing in traders, artisans, and thinkers from all corners of the known world. And what happens when people from diverse cultures collide? Exchange, cultural, intellectual, and of course commercial. Lydia became a cultural crossroads, where ideas flowed as readily as coins. Greek philosophers, Persian merchants, and Anatolian artisans all found common ground in the Lydian marketplace. This mingling of cultures enriched Lydia's own customs and traditions, turning the kingdom into a vibrant tapestry of influences. Long before globalization became a buzzword, Lydia was living it. But let's not gloss over the more contentious side of this cultural exchange. Not everyone was thrilled with Lydia's success. Rivalries simmered, especially with the Persian Empire. You see, the Persians weren't just sitting back, admiring Lydia's coins from afar. They had their own imperial ambitions. The wealth of Lydia was a tempting prize, and the Persians, ever the expansionists, had their eyes set on it. This rivalry would eventually lead to military conflicts, with Lydia caught in the crosshairs of Persian expansion. Yet, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were moments of diplomacy and mutual respect. Take the story of Croesus and the Oracle of Delphi. Croesus, with his legendary wealth, famously consulted the oracle before making any major decisions. The Greeks, who revered the oracle, saw this as a sign of cultural respect and engagement. It was a diplomatic move that strengthened ties between Lydia and the Greek world, showcasing how Lydia's wealth could be a bridge, not just a barrier. As Lydia's story unfolded, it became clear that their wealth wasn't just about coins and commerce. It was about influence, the kind that could sway politics, forge alliances, and ignite rivalries. Lydia's success set off a chain reaction that resonated throughout the ancient world, transforming economies and societies in its wake. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Lydia's golden age. Wealth, as it often does, brought its own set of problems. Social stratification deepened as the rich got richer, and the poor, well, less so. The gap between Lydia's elite, who wielded coins like scepters, and the everyday folks, who still bartered for bread, was as wide as the Pactolus River. This economic divide was a stark reminder that while coins could revolutionize trade, they could also consolidate power in the hands of the few. Yet, despite these challenges, Lydia's innovations left an indelible mark on the world. Their coins became the gold standard, pun intended, for monetary systems across the ancient world. As other kingdoms and city-states adopted Lydia's invention, they also absorbed the idea of a centralized economic power, a concept that would shape the political landscapes of empires to come. In sum, Lydia's shimmering legacy was a double-edged sword. It brought prosperity and cultural richness, but also envy and rivalry. It sparked admiration and alliances. It also deepened social divides. As we continue to unravel Lydia's complex history, one thing is clear. This little kingdom was more than just a footnote in the annals of time. It was a trailblazer, a cultural cauldron, and a testament to the transformative power of innovation. And as we move forward, we'll see how Lydia's story continues to unfold, weaving its way through the intricate tapestry of ancient history. So, buckle up, because the Lydian saga is far from over, and there's plenty more to explore in this narrative of wealth, power, and cultural exchange. And speaking of the Lydian saga being far from over, let's delve into the chapter where things take a dramatic turn. Spoiler alert, it involves the Persians, and not in a let's be best friends kind of way. Now, if you thought Lydia's rise was impressive, its fall is the stuff of cautionary tales, a stark reminder that even the shiniest coins can lose their luster. Enter Cyrus the Great, the Persian king whose title wasn't just for show. This guy wasn't content with just one corner of the ancient world. He wanted the whole shebang. By the 6th century BCE, Lydia had grown a little too rich and a little too tempting for Cyrus to ignore. So in 547 BCE, he decided to pay a visit, not with a fruit basket, but with a well-organized army. Croesus, the Lydian king who was practically swimming in gold, decided to take him on. After all, what's the point of having a fortune if you can't use it to defend your turf? But here's where the story takes a twist that would make any strategist wince. Croesus, confident in his rich-as-Croesus status, consulted the oracle of Delphi, because why not get some divine input when your kingdom's on the line? The oracle, with its penchant for cryptic advice, told him that if he attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus, perhaps blinded by his own wealth and hubris, thought this was a green light to go full steam ahead. The catch, the great empire that would fall wasn't Persia, it was Lydia. In a series of battles that culminated in the Battle of Thymbra, Croesus's forces were defeated. Cyrus, with his knack for strategy and a little help from the oracle's ambiguity, captured Sardis, the Lydian capital. And just like that, Lydia's golden age flickered out. The kingdom that had set the standard for wealth and innovation found itself under Persian control, its treasures carted off, and its legacy left to linger in the annals of history. Now, you might be wondering, where did it all go wrong for Lydia? Sure, they had the coins, the alliances, the strategic location. But here's the unvarnished truth. Wealth is a double-edged sword. It can build an empire, but it can also attract the kind of attention that ends empires. Lydia's riches made it a target, and no amount of gold could buy immunity from the ambitions of a ruler like Cyrus. And let's not overlook the human element in this downfall. Croesus, for all his wealth, was still a man prone to the same missteps as rulers throughout history. He overestimated his own strength and underestimated the tenacity of his adversary. It's a classic tale of hubris, a lesson that rings as true today as it did in ancient times. Power and prosperity can make you complacent, blinding you to the challenges lurking on the horizon. But here's the silver, or should I say electrum, lining. Lydia's legacy didn't crumble with its walls. In fact, its innovations lived on, rippling through the empires that followed. The Persians, ever the opportunists, saw the genius in coinage and ran with it. Under Darius the Great, they introduced the daric, a gold coin that became a cornerstone of the Persian economy. Talk about turning conquest into profit. Lydia's monetary system became the backbone of trade across the Persian Empire, demonstrating that even in defeat, its innovations held immense value. And it wasn't just the Persians who benefited. The Greeks, who had already been enamored with the idea of coinage, continued to refine and expand upon it. Cities like Athens minted their own coins, paving the way for an economic network that would support the rise of democracy and philosophical inquiry. The Romans, too, would eventually adopt coinage, creating a monetary system that underpinned one of the most formidable empires in history. So what can we learn from Lydia's rise and fall, aside from the fact that oracles should come with clearer disclaimers? For starters, the transient nature of power and wealth is a lesson as old as time. Lydia's story is a reminder that economic brilliance and strategic positioning can propel a kingdom to the heights of prosperity, but they also make it vulnerable to the shifting tides of political ambition. Moreover, Lydia's tale underscores the importance of adaptability. while Croesus's downfall was a cautionary tale of overconfidence. The survival of Lydian innovations in other cultures speaks to the enduring power of ideas. Coins, as it turns out, were more resilient than the kingdom that birthed them. They became a universal language of trade, outlasting the boundaries of nations and the whims of their rulers. In the end, Lydia's legacy is a testament to the transformative power of innovation. It reminds us that while kingdoms may rise and fall, the ideas they generate can echo through the ages, shaping the world in ways their creators could never have imagined. So next time you jingle those coins in your pocket, take a moment to appreciate the ancient Lydians who, in their quest for economic efficiency, laid the foundation for the world of commerce we navigate today. It's a legacy that proves even the smallest kingdom can leave a mark as indelible as the face on a coin. Your eyes crack open to the sounds of a bustling Celtic village in 1st century BC Gaul. A far cry from the peace one might expect for a druid like yourself, right? Forget the dreamy, moss-covered forest glades and mystical mists. You're waking up to the din of livestock and the chatter of early risers. You roll out of your straw bedding, a luxury for the time, and brush off the remnants of last night's dreams, which are probably as fanciful as those myths about druids being all about magic and tree-hugging rituals. First things first, you reach for your rugged, weather-beaten cloak, your trusty companion against the morning chill. You're not just some enchanted forest wanderer. You've got a job to do. Druids, contrary to popular belief, were the intellectual heavyweights of Celtic society. You're not just a spiritual guide. Oh no, you're the doctor, lawyer, and teacher rolled into one. No pressure, right? As you step out, the village is already alive with activity. The clamor of day-to-day life surrounds you. There's the sound of the blacksmith hammering away, the aroma of bread baking, an early morning treat if you can snag a piece, and the constant buzz of conversation. Druids like you are part of this vibrant community, a far cry from the solitary hermit lifestyle often depicted in romantic tales. Your first task is to check on the health of the villagers and livestock. Indeed, you're the original multitasker, juggling roles with the dexterity that would make a modern-day CEO envious. But before you dive into the nitty-gritty of medicinal herbs and healing rituals, let's debunk some myths. Forget the idea of druids waving wands and casting spells. Instead, you're more likely to be found with a collection of plants, each with a specific use, not unlike a primitive pharmacy. You've got to know your stuff. After all, lives depend on your knowledge, and unlike today, there's no second opinion or online symptom checker to lean on. Now, let's talk status. Druids were not just any villagers. You were the rock stars of your time, wielding significant influence. Roman writer Julius Caesar, who had a thing for documenting these sorts of international affairs, noted that druids were exempt from military service and didn't pay taxes. Not bad, right? Free from the usual duties that tie others down, you're free to focus on your studies and responsibilities. Druids like you are a respected elite, holding a revered place in society alongside the warriors and nobles. As you move through the village, you're greeted with nods and respectful acknowledgments. It's clear that your role extends beyond the spiritual. Druids are also political advisors. You better believe that when the chieftains have a decision to make, they're turning to you for guidance. It's a delicate dance of power and influence, navigating tribal politics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. But what about the mystical side of things? Surely there's some truth to those legends. Well, yes, druids did perform religious ceremonies, which could be quite a spectacle. But let's not get carried away with the Hollywood version of hooded figures chanting in the moonlight. These rituals were practical, aligning with the cycles of nature and ensuring the community's well-being. You're more likely to be found overseeing a harvest festival or conducting rites that mark the changing of seasons. These are crucial events, reinforcing the connection between the community and the natural world, a balance that's essential for survival in this era. As the morning progresses, you find a moment to yourself, perhaps by the village's communal fire. It's here that you reflect on the weight of your responsibilities. The knowledge you hold is vast, passed down through generations in an oral tradition that's as much about memorization as it is about interpretation. There are no books to rely on, only the stories and teachings that have been entrusted to you. And with the Romans casting their imperial shadow over the region, the role of the Druid is more critical than ever. Your insights could mean the difference between peace and conflict, prosperity and hardship. So, while it might not be the enchanted life of fantasy, being a druid is still something extraordinary. You're a linchpin, holding together the threads of your community's spiritual, legal, and educational needs. As the day unfolds, you prepare to dive deeper into these roles, ready to tackle whatever challenges arise with the wisdom and knowledge that have been your people's guide through ages past. And as you stand there, taking in the vibrant tapestry of life in 1st century BC Gaul, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You may not be conjuring magic with a wave of your hand, but the impact you have is as profound as any spell. The day is young, and your duties as a druid are just beginning. As the village hums with the rhythm of daily life, you find yourself pondering the incredible complexity of Gaul's economic web. Forget the cliché of the isolated Celtic settlement. Gaul in the 1st century BC is a buzzing hub of trade routes and political maneuvering. Imagine a sprawling network of paths crisscrossing the landscape, connecting dozens of tribes, and yes, even reaching out to the Romans, those notorious expansionists with an eye for real estate. These routes aren't just for local gossip or the latest in tribal fashion. They're arteries of commerce, pumping life into the economy. Salt, iron, and even wine are flowing through Gaul like lifeblood, supporting a thriving market that would make any trader's heart skip a beat. Now, about that wine. It's not just the preserve of the Roman elite. Celtic chieftains and the well-to-do like to indulge, too. Archaeological finds reveal amphorae littering ancient sites, evidence of a taste for the finer things. And here's the kicker. These aren't just any wine vessels. They're imported from the Mediterranean, a testament to the extensive trade networks that Gaul tapped into. Picture this. A single amphora filled with wine could set you back a pretty penny, equivalent to several weeks' wages for a laborer. Talk about a luxury item. It's clear that Gaul isn't some backwater, but a sophisticated player on the ancient world stage. And speaking of sophistication, let's not forget the Druid's role in all this economic hustle and bustle. You're not just a philosopher in a robe. You're a key player in the trade negotiations and political alliances that underpin these networks. Think of yourself as a kind of ancient influencer, wielding soft power with the kind of finesse that would make any modern diplomat green with envy. Druids held sway over many tribes, not only because of their spiritual clout, but also due to their reputation for wisdom and fairness. If a trade dispute arises, who better to mediate than someone who commands respect across tribal lines? But let's not romanticize too much. The reality of this era is a constant dance with danger. Enter Rome, the elephant in the room, or should we say, the wolf at the door. By the time you're going about your daily duties, Julius Caesar is busy writing himself into history as the conqueror of Gaul. His commentaries, while self-aggrandizing, provide a glimpse into the political chess game unfolding around you. The Romans are not just trading partners. They're strategic adversaries, their legions eyeing your lands with imperialistic hunger. It's a classic tale of ambition and expansion, and Gaul is the chessboard. So, how do you, as a druid, navigate this precarious balance, with a mix of diplomacy, cunning, and perhaps a dash of old-world charm? Druids often acted as intermediaries, negotiating peace treaties or advising chieftains on the best course of action. You might find yourself in a smoke-filled hut, huddled with tribal leaders, debating whether to ally with Rome or resist the encroaching legions. It's a high-stakes game where the wrong move could mean the loss of autonomy, or worse, lives. Economically, Gaul is a patchwork of relative prosperity and hardship. The cost of living is a constant concern, with prices fluctuating based on the whims of supply and demand. A bushel of grain might cost a few denarii, but in times of scarcity, prices soar and families face tough choices. The wealthier tribes can weather these storms thanks to their trade connections, but for the average villager, it's a balancing act. Your role as a druid involves not just spiritual guidance, but practical advice on managing resources and preparing for lean times. As you continue your day, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of your people. The Celts, with their vibrant culture and fierce independence, are a force to be reckoned with. Yet the shadow of Rome looms large, a reminder that even the most resilient societies must adapt or face subjugation. It's a reality that adds weight to your every decision, every counsel you offer. The stakes are high, and your influence could shape the future of Gaul. So, as you gather with fellow druids and chieftains, discussing the latest Roman moves or debating the merits of a new trade route. Remember that you're part of a grand narrative. You are not just a figure in the mist of history, but a pivotal player in a complex, dynamic world. The choices you make today could echo for generations, influencing not just the fate of your village, but the very course of history itself. And that, my friend, is no small feat. As the fire crackles and the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape, you prepare for the evening ceremonies with a renewed sense of purpose. The day is far from over, and your role as a druid, as an influencer, as a guardian of your people's future, continues to unfold in the rich tapestry of 1st century BC Gaul. As the evening ceremonies wrap up and the last flickers of firelight dance on your cloak, the day's responsibilities give way to the next grand druidic endeavor, education. Now, before you go envisioning a magical school with floating candles and enchanted staircases, let's set the record straight. Druid training isn't about waving wands. It's more akin to an ancient think tank where critical thinking reigns supreme. Forget Hogwarts. Think more Plato's Academy with a dash of extreme endurance, because druid schooling is no walk in the park. To dive into the world of a druid apprentice, you're looking at a commitment that would make even the most ambitious student pause. We're talking up to 20 years of rigorous training. Yes, you heard that right. 2 decades of memorizing what might feel like an endless stream of knowledge, all passed down orally. There's no library to retreat to, no textbooks to cram from. It's just you, your memory, and a lot of late nights under the stars, absorbing lessons that span from astronomy to law and everything in between. Let's start with the celestial side of things. Druids were the original stargazers, and not just for the romance of it. Understanding the heavens was crucial for everything from agriculture to navigation. Imagine trying to sow crops without knowing when the seasons would change. Talk about living on the edge. Druids needed to pinpoint solstices and equinoxes with precision that would impress even Neil deGrasse Tyson. It wasn't magic. It was meticulous observation and the ability to read the natural world like a living textbook. And then there's the law. If you thought modern legal systems were complex, you haven't seen anything yet. Druids were the go-to arbitrators in a time when justice was as much about tribal harmony as it was about right and wrong. They were expected to know the ins and outs of tribal codes, which could differ dramatically from one group to the next. It was a legal landscape, as varied as the hills of Gaul, requiring the kind of mental gymnastics that would leave even seasoned lawyers scratching their heads. But let's not forget the myths, the irresistible tales of druids wielding supernatural powers. While the idea of turning enemies into frogs is delightful, it's not exactly grounded in reality. Sure, druids had a reputation for being able to harness the forces of nature, but this was more about deep ecological knowledge than any hocus-pocus. Think of it as an ancient version of what we might call environmental science today. They understood ecosystems, medicinal plants, and animal behavior in ways that seemed mystical to the uninitiated. And then there's the storytelling. This is where the druids' charisma truly shines. They were the keepers of history, lore, and cultural identity, preserving narratives that shaped the Celtic world. Imagine being the person responsible for remembering not just your own history, but the collective memory of your people. Talk about pressure. But it's also what gave druids their legendary status, an ability to weave tales that were as educational as they were captivating. Economically, the role of druids in education wasn't just about enlightenment. It was a strategic investment in the future. Knowledge was power, and those who mastered it held the keys to influence and leadership. A well-educated druid could advise on trade negotiations, mediate disputes, and guide their people through the ever-shifting sands of tribal politics. It was a career path, if you will, that led not just to personal prestige, but to the very heart of societal progress. Now, back to those myths. They didn't just come out of nowhere. The Romans, with their penchant for sensationalizing the foreign and mysterious, played a big part in crafting the image of druids as mystical figures. Julius Caesar, in particular, had a field day with his descriptions, painting them as both wise sages and formidable opponents. It was a blend of admiration and fear, a PR campaign as powerful as any modern political spin. Yet, beneath the cloak of legend lies a truth that's far more compelling. The Druids were the intellectual backbone of Celtic society, the embodiment of wisdom cultivated through painstaking effort and dedication. They were the ones who ensured that despite the Roman advance, the Celtic identity endured, even if it had to adapt to survive. So, as you sit there, perhaps by the flickering light of a torch, reflecting on the day's events, remember this. Being a Druid was about more than rituals and robes. It was about mastering a body of knowledge so vast and nuanced that it shaped the fate of nations. It was about navigating the complexities of a world in flux, using intellect and insight as your compass. And while the stories of magic may capture the imagination, it's the reality of the Druids' achievements that truly deserves our awe. As the stars begin to dart the night sky, you prepare to rest, knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities to apply the wisdom you've spent years acquiring. In the quiet of the evening, with the village settling down around you, the weight of your role is both a burden and a gift. You're part of a legacy that stretches back through the mists of time, a living link in the chain of history. And that, my friend, is a kind of magic all its own. After a long day navigating the intricacies of Celtic life, you finally find a moment to sit back and let the evening air envelop you. But don't get too comfortable, because the social web of Druid life is more tangled than a ball of ancient yarn. Let's dig into that tapestry, shall we? Now, about those Druids and their supposed tree-hugging tendencies. Sure, they had a thing for oak groves, but don't let the foliage fool you. Druids were as much about law and order as they were about mistletoe and moonlight. They were the original social architects, shaping Celtic identity with the precision of a master builder. Imagine you're a Druid sitting at the heart of a tribal assembly. Your voice carries weight, not just in spiritual matters, but in the legal realm too. You're more Judge Judy than Gandalf here, wielding your knowledge to arbitrate disputes and maintain harmony. Speaking of harmony, or the lack thereof, let's chat about the legal systems. Picture this. You're tasked with resolving a dispute over stolen cattle, a common issue when livestock is currency. The Druid's role, to ensure justice is served, and by justice, I mean a solution that keeps everyone from reaching for their spears. Druids were the Goda mediators, and their decisions were respected almost as if they had descended from the gods themselves. But hold on to your Harley branches, because these weren't exactly your modern courtroom dramas. There were no gavels or powdered wigs, just a lot of oral tradition and community consensus. Druids employed something akin to a restorative justice approach, focusing on restitution rather than punishment. It's less about throwing someone in an ancient equivalent of a cell, and more about restoring balance. That's right. Long before the modern justice system got its act together, Druids were pioneering ways to keep the peace without overcrowding the local dungeons. The social fabric they wove wasn't all sunshine and serenity, though. The idea of Druids as pacifists is as romantic as it is inaccurate. These guys weren't averse to a bit of strategic warfare when necessary. Remember, they advised chieftains on everything from battle strategies to alliances, and their counsel could tip the scales in a tribal skirmish. They were like ancient military advisors, with a side of philosophical wisdom. And here's a kicker for you. Druids were integral to Celtic identity, which was itself a complex mosaic of tribes and cultures, each with its own customs and laws. Celts weren't a monolithic group, but a swirling mix of tribes spread across what is now France, Spain, and even parts of Turkey. The Druids' task was to unify these diverse cultures under a shared sense of identity, while still respecting their distinct local traditions. It was a balancing act worthy of an Olympic gymnast. Economically speaking, Druids played a crucial role in maintaining the social order. They were the glue that held the tribal confederations together, ensuring economic stability through fair trade practices and equitable resource distribution. Picture a scene where a Druid is negotiating trade terms between rival tribes, ensuring that both parties walk away satisfied, or at least not plotting each other's demise. They were the original trade negotiators, smoothing over tensions with diplomacy and a dash of charm. Social norms were another area where Druids left their mark. They were responsible for upholding societal values, which included everything from marriage customs to inheritance laws. Forget the idea of a Druid as a hermit lost in thought. They were deeply involved in community affairs, shaping the moral compass of their people. If a tribe was the ship, the Druids were the navigators, steering it through the choppy waters of social change. Now, let's address the elephant, or maybe the bore in the room, the Romans. While they were busy building roads and conquering lands, they also brought their own legal systems, which sometimes clashed with Celtic laws. Druids had to adapt, blending Roman influences with traditional Celtic practices. It was a cultural mashup that required finesse, diplomacy, and a fair bit of cunning. The Romans viewed the Druids with a mix of fascination and fear, partly because of their influence, and partly due to the mystique surrounding them. Caesar himself noted their role in society, though often with a hint of exaggeration. To the Romans, the Druids were a curious anomaly, philosophers in a warrior society, wielding power without weapons. It's no wonder they were both revered and reviled. So, as the stars twinkle above and the village quiets down, take a moment to appreciate the true depth of Druidic life. Beneath the layers of myth and legend, these intellectual powerhouses shaped the social and legal landscapes of their time. They weren't just part of the tapestry of Celtic culture. They were the weavers, crafting a legacy that has endured through the ages. And as you ponder this intricate web, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of a society that balanced tradition and change, mysticism and pragmatism, all guided by the steady hand of the Druids. Tomorrow, as the sun rises, we'll dive back into the rich tapestry of 1st century BC Gaul, ready to unravel more of the mysteries and realities of a world long past. The journey continues, and who knows what new insights and revelations await. After all, history is full of surprises, and the Druid story is far from over. So, as you prepare to dive back into the rich tapestry of 1st century BC Gaul, let's take a moment to step back and gaze at the bigger picture. The legacy of the Druids, those enigmatic figures who have haunted the annals of history with a mix of intrigue and misinterpretation. You see, time has a funny way of turning facts into fables, and the Druids are no exception. Their image has been shaped, reshaped, and completely twisted over the centuries by everyone from Roman chroniclers to modern filmmakers. Let's start with the Romans, those ancient masters of spin. Julius Caesar, that ever-ambitious penman of conquest, painted the Druids as a curious blend of wise sages and sinister sorcerers. His writings offered a glimpse of admiration wrapped in a cloak of exoticism. It's as if he couldn't quite decide whether to fear them or invite them over for a toga party. But here's the kicker. Much of what we know about Druids comes from these Roman accounts, which were more about justifying conquest than preserving an accurate historical record. So, when Caesar described the Druids conducting human sacrifices, it might have been less about truth and more about making the Gauls look like a bunch of barbaric hooligans in need of a good Roman civilization bath. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and the Druids have undergone a remarkable image makeover. Enter the Romantics of the 18th century, who were all about reviving the mystique of the past, often with a very liberal sprinkling of artistic license. To them, Druids became the wise old men of the forest, the keepers of ancient wisdom, and let's be real, the perfect backdrop for a windswept landscape painting. This is where the notion of Druids as tree-hugging, robe-wearing mystics really took root, pardon the pun. And then, of course, we've got modern pop culture, which has embraced the Druidic myth with open arms and a flair for the dramatic. From literature to video games, Druids have been cast as everything from wise mentors to powerful spellcasters. They're often depicted as nature's guardians, wielding magic that would make Gandalf look like an amateur. It's a romantic image, no doubt, but one that strays far from the historical reality. So, what would those ancient Druids think about their Hollywood portrayals? Imagine them sitting in a modern cinema, popcorn in hand, watching themselves on the big screen. Chances are, they'd be both amused and baffled. On one hand, they'd likely appreciate the nod to their intellectual prowess, albeit with a heavy dose of fictional flair. On the other hand, they'd probably have a good laugh at the idea of shooting lightning bolts from their fingertips. After all, their true power lay in their minds, not in mythical mumbo-jumbo. But let's not let the glitz of pop culture overshadow the real achievements of the Druids. These were the intellectual heavyweights of their time, the keepers of knowledge in a world where wisdom was as valuable as gold. Their legacy isn't just in the myths that have grown around them, but in the very fabric of Celtic society they helped weave. They were the ones who ensured that, even in the face of Roman expansion, the Celtic culture endured, adapting and surviving through the centuries. And here's where the real magic lies, in the continuity of their influence. While the Druids as an institution faded with the Roman conquest, the Celtic identity did not. It evolved, absorbed new influences, and continued to thrive in different forms across Europe. The echoes of Druidic thought can still be heard in the folklore and traditions of Celtic nations today. It's a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and culture, a reminder that ideas can outlast even the mightiest empires. So, as you wind down from your day exploring the life and times of the Druids, take a moment to reflect on their true legacy. Beyond the myths and the magic, their story is one of resilience, intellect, and adaptation. They were not just figures in the mist of history, but pivotal players in the grand narrative of human civilization. And while Hollywood may continue to cast them as mystical wizards, the reality of their achievements is far more compelling and, dare I say, magical in its own right. As the stars twinkle above and the village settles into the quiet of the night, remember that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. The Druids may be gone, but their legacy lives on, woven into the very fabric of the past and present. And as you drift off to sleep, carrying these new nuggets of knowledge, know that you've connected with a chapter of history that's as rich and complex as any tale of fantasy. Sweet dreams, my friend, and may the wisdom of the Druids guide you into tomorrow. In the pantheon of historical rock stars, Alexander the Great is a frontman who never left the stage. The guy conquered most of the known world before most of us are old enough to figure out how taxes work. Now, while we could talk all day about his military genius, or how he spread Greek culture like a very aggressive missionary, today we're diving into something a little less sword-swinging and a bit more kitchen-friendly. What exactly did Alexander the Great put on his plate? First, let's set the table, literally and figuratively, with a dash of context. We're in the 4th century BCE, when Macedonia wasn't just a blip on a map, but the powerhouse of the ancient world, thanks to Big Al and his equally ambitious dad, Philip Roman II. Back then, food wasn't just nourishment, it was a statement. It was the Instagram feed of the ancient world, though it took a bit longer to prepare, and you couldn't exactly scroll past what you didn't like. Now, Macedonian cuisine at the time was a mix of practicality and showmanship. The economy was primarily agrarian, meaning your average Macedonian was knee-deep in wheat and barley, not caviar and champagne. Bread was the staple, and if that sounds mundane, remember, this was long before gluten-free was a thing. On the fanciest of days, you might add a splash of olive oil or a sprinkle of salt, both of which were practically gold-tier commodities. But let's not get too ahead. This was also a time when economic and social factors dictated what you could afford to slap on your plate. The Macedonian economy, though robust thanks to their conquests, was heavily reliant on agriculture and trade. Grain, olives, and wine were big deals, not just in the markets, but also in diplomacy. You couldn't exactly pay off a neighboring king with a sack of barley, but you could definitely use it to keep your army from revolting. Speaking of armies, that's where Alexander's diet gets interesting. Leading a massive force across continents wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a dietary one. The food had to be preserved, portable, and plentiful. Imagine trying to feed tens of thousands of soldiers. It's like catering a wedding, except the guests might actually kill you if the fish is bad. So, staples like salted fish, dried meats, and hard cheeses were the unsung heroes of his campaigns. But let's not forget Alexander's other life at court, where meals were less about survival and more about spectacle. Royal feasts were lavish, elaborate affairs. Think Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and more roasted peacock. These gatherings weren't just about stuffing one's face. They were political arenas, where alliances could be forged over a shared dish of spiced lamb, or broken over a spilled goblet of wine. Imagine the pressure if you were the chef. No room for error when the guest list includes not just the who's who of Macedonian high society, but also anyone with a claim to a border you might want to conquer next. Now, there's a huge difference between the royal table and what your average Macedonian shepherd was munching on. While Alexander might have had access to exotic delicacies, the common folk were more likely to dine on lentils and barley soup. Meat was a luxury, not a staple for most. In fact, the diet was so agrarian that if you were a farmer, you were likely eating what you grew, which made the concept of food miles pretty non-existent. You weren't going to see any pomegranates unless you lived near a trade route or knew someone who did. As for beverages, wine was the drink of choice, and not just because it made long strategy meetings more bearable. It was safer than most water, easier to store, and frankly, who doesn't like a little fermented grape juice after a long day of empire building? But don't picture a sommelier swirling a glass. This was more dilute with water or risk getting plastered. Drinking it straight was for barbarians or those looking to forget the fact they were out of olives again. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The diet of Alexander the Great was a complex interplay of necessity and luxury, of survival and spectacle. It was shaped by the practical realities of military campaigns and the political needs of a burgeoning empire. While the myth of Alexander might paint him as a figure feasting endlessly on exotic foods, the truth is a bit more grounded and perhaps even more fascinating. Stay tuned as we dig deeper into the culinary world that fed one of history's most legendary figures. If we're going to dissect Alexander the Great's diet, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dig into the nitty-gritty of what this legendary figure likely dined on. Spoiler alert, he wasn't feasting on ambrosia or chugging nectar, more like lamb stew with a side of strategic planning. Let's start with the meats. When Alexander wasn't busy reshaping the world map, he might have indulged in a bit of lamb or goat. These were the meat options du jour for your average Macedonian, and they were as common as selfies at a concert today. However, this was still the 4th century BCE, so let's not pretend meat was a staple in every meal. Even for Alexander, it was more of a treat than an everyday occurrence. Now, grains and vegetables were the true backbone of the Macedonian diet. Wheat and barley were the B&C and JZ of ancient grains, ubiquitous and indispensable. Bread, as we've touched on, was the daily grind, quite literally, and if you were lucky, you might jazz it up with some olive oil or honey. As for veggies, think onions, garlic, and lentils, staples that made up for their lack of glamour with nutritional reliability. So, while Alexander might have dreamed of epic feasts, he was more likely to find himself dining on a hearty lentil soup when not at court. Let's talk about those legendary banquets, shall we? Recorded accounts tell us of lavish feasts that make the askers' after-party look like a casual potluck. Roasted peacock, anyone. But before we get swept up in the mythos, let's question how much of this was fact and how much was ancient PR. The opulence of these gatherings was as much about spectacle as it was sustenance. Think more Game of Thrones, less medieval times. Political alliances were seasoned over these meals, with every bite potentially altering history. However, the logistics of pulling off such grand affairs weren't as simple as snapping fingers. Transporting all those exotic delicacies across vast distances and hostile territories wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Imagine organizing a dinner party where every ingredient had to survive a trek across deserts and mountains. Not so easy peasy, is it? But why the obsession with grandeur? Well, in a world where your reputation was as critical as your military strategy, these banquets were a chance for Alexander to flex not just his muscles, but his wealth and influence. They were the precursor to the modern-day influencer's Instagram feed, a curated display of power and prosperity. Still, you peel back the layers of myth, you find a more pragmatic diet underneath. Sure, there might have been peacocks at the table, but there were also plenty of humble onions and barley lurking in the background. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're here. You might have heard tales of Alexander downing gallons of wine, but the truth is, drinking was often a tactical affair. Wine was diluted with water, a habit that might horrify modern vintners, but was a necessity back then. It was about survival as much as anything else, given the often questionable quality of available water sources. Plus, nobody wants a tipsy general making battle plans. We should also address the idea that Alexander was some kind of gluttonous emperor reclining on a chaise longue, being fed grapes by grateful subjects. The reality was much more grounded. When you're leading a marching army, every resource counts, and even the great Alexander had to be mindful of logistics. The diet on campaign was more about practicality than pleasure. Salted fish, dried meats, and hard cheeses were the real MVPs, ensuring the troops stayed fed and battle-ready. It's like the ancient version of energy bars, functional, not gourmet. Despite the romanticized image of endless banquets, Alexander's diet was a balancing act between necessity and luxury. While his table might have boasted exotic items from time to time, the foundation was built on the staples of the Macedonian diet. And while the courts of Alexander were certainly grand, the logistics of feeding an empire were anything but glamorous. So next time you hear tales of Alexander the Great's opulent feasts, remember, it wasn't just about indulgence, but also about sustaining an empire on the move. The table was as much a battlefield as any, where alliances were formed and power was solidified. Stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers on Alexander's world and explore how food was a tool of empire, not just a plate of indulgence. Now, let's turn our attention to the logistics of feeding an army on the move, which is a bit like planning a cross-country road trip for 50,000 hangry travelers. Imagine trying to keep that many soldiers fed while marching across deserts, mountains, and enemy territories. Welcome to Alexander the Great's version of Hell's Kitchen, except instead of Gordon Ramsay, you've got an impatient general with a world to conquer. First, let's talk supply lines. These were the lifelines of Alexander's conquests, stretching across the vast distances he covered, from the sun-baked sands of Egypt to the rugged terrains of Asia Minor. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. Picture an ancient Amazon prime, but without the drones or next-day delivery. Instead, you had caravans of pack animals and ships loaded with supplies, following the army like an ancient food truck convoy. It was an impressive feat of organization, one that relied heavily on local resources and the goodwill or fear of conquered territories. The cornerstone of this logistical ballet was the humble grain. Barley and wheat were the bread and butter, literally, of Alexander's campaigns. Soldiers received daily rations of about 2 pounds of grain, which they ground into flour for bread or boiled into a porridge. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a power bar, except you couldn't just stash it in your pocket. The challenge was keeping these supplies flowing, which required meticulous planning and a bit of luck. After all, one bad harvest or a particularly sneaky enemy could disrupt the whole operation. And when you're in the middle of nowhere, you can't exactly pop into the nearest ancient grocery store. Then there was the geography to contend with. Different regions offered different challenges and opportunities. Marching through the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, for instance, meant access to local grains and livestock. But trudging through the arid Iranian plateau, not so much. Here, Alexander's men had to make do with whatever they could carry or scrounge from the land, relying heavily on preserved foods like salted fish and dried meats. These were the MREs, meals ready to eat, of the ancient world, providing essential protein to keep the troops marching forward, even if they weren't exactly Michelin-star cuisine. But feeding an army wasn't just about calories, it was about morale. Hungry soldiers are cranky soldiers, and cranky soldiers don't win battles. Alexander understood this well, which is why he often shared his men's hardships, eating the same rations and sleeping on the same hard ground. It was a savvy move, earning him loyalty and respect among his troops. But it wasn't all camaraderie and campfire songs. Tensions could run high, especially when supplies ran low or the march dragged on longer than expected. Imagine the mood on a forced march through the sweltering heat of the Jedrosian desert, where the blistering sun was as much an enemy as any Persian soldier. It took every ounce of Alexander's leadership to keep his army focused and moving forward. And then there were the unexpected feasts. Occasionally, after capturing a particularly wealthy city or defeating a significant enemy, the troops would find themselves gorging on the spoils of war. These moments were rare, but sweet, like finding a stash of chocolate in a pile of vegetables. Such feasting wasn't just about filling bellies. It was a psychological boost, a reward for their sacrifices. However, Alexander was careful to remind his men that these were exceptions, not the rule. The campaign was the main course, and their ultimate prize lay not in the food but in the glory of conquest. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was, for most of the campaign, soldiers had to be resourceful and, dare I say, frugal. They learned to make do with little, turning whatever they could forage into sustenance. It was survival of the fittest, and the fittest were those who could stomach yet another bowl of bland grain porridge. It's a testament to their resilience, and perhaps a reminder that sometimes history's greatest feats are fueled not by lavish banquets, but by simple, unremarkable meals eaten on the march. Yet, despite the hardships, Alexander's army was a well-oiled machine, one that could pivot on a dime and seize opportunities as they arose. When they entered new lands, they adapted to local customs and foods, integrating them into their diet. It was a culinary melting pot, long before the term was coined, and it helped ensure the army's success across diverse territories. This adaptability was key to their survival and a lesson in the power of flexibility, both in diet and strategy. So, what's the takeaway? Alexander's army wasn't just a conquering force. It was a mobile community sustained by grit, ingenuity, and the occasional lucky break. Feeding such a massive group was a feat of logistics that rivaled the battles themselves. In a way, it's a story of how the mundane, food, supply lines, rations, can be as crucial to history as any heroic charge or brilliant strategy. And while the myths might paint Alexander as dining on ambrosia while plotting his next conquest, the truth is far more grounded, and dare I say, even more impressive. The world wasn't conquered on an empty stomach, and Alexander the Great knew that better than anyone. As we continue to delve into the intricacies of his campaigns, keep in mind that every victory was as much about the bread as the blade. Stay tuned for more on how this legendary figure fed his ambition and his army, one grain at a time. As we shift from the logistics of feeding an army to the culinary diplomacy at Alexander's table, imagine the role of food in the grand theater of politics. You see, in Alexander's world, a banquet wasn't just a meal. It was a stage, a chessboard, and a battlefield all rolled into one. If you wanted to impress a foreign dignitary or sway a wavering ally, you didn't just send them a scroll or a statue. You invited them to dinner, and boy, did you pull out all the stops. Let's set the scene. A Macedonian banquet was the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes poker game, where the stakes were empires and the cards were dishes. Picture a long, low table, laden with more food than a Thanksgiving feast on steroids. Sure, there were the usual suspects: roasted meats, fragrant breads, and enough wine to float a small ship. But there were also exotic delicacies that shouted, "Look what I've conquered." Think Persian spices, Egyptian figs, and the odd peacock for dramatic flair. This wasn't just about feeding your guests. It was about sending a message. I'm not just Alexander the Great. I'm Alexander the global gastronomer. Now, before you get swept up in the romance of it all, let's dig into the gritty reality. These banquets were less about indulgence and more about influence. Each dish was a diplomatic tool, each goblet of wine a gesture of goodwill or a veiled threat. The point was to establish power dynamics and forge alliances, all while making sure you didn't accidentally poison the guy sitting next to you. Talk about pressure. Consider, for instance, the infamous banquet at Opis in 324 BCE. Alexander organized this shindig to celebrate the integration of Persian and Macedonian cultures, a real conveyor moment in theory. But beneath the surface, it was a strategic move to quell dissent and secure loyalty among his diverse followers. The menu was a veritable United Nations of cuisine, featuring Greek olives, Babylonian dates, and even some Indian spices Alexander picked up during his campaigns. It was a culinary declaration of, look how far my influence reaches. But here's the kicker. Even as Alexander played the gracious host, his guests knew the game. They were acutely aware that every bite could signal allegiance or rebellion. In fact, these events often had more intrigue than a season of House of Cards. Alliances were forged, plots were hatched, and more than one guest likely left with a new understanding of their place in the Macedonian pecking order. It was the ultimate power lunch, where the menu could change the course of history. Of course, not every legend about Alexander's banquets holds water. Take the tales of endless indulgence and orgiastic feasts. Sure, the mythologized image of Alexander as a decadent ruler, sipping wine from jewel-encrusted cups while being fanned by exotic dancers, makes for great storytelling. But the truth is more nuanced. The real Alexander was a master tactician who understood that food was a currency of power. While his feasts were certainly grand, they were also calculated displays meant to strengthen his grip on his empire. Food, for Alexander, was more than sustenance. It was a tool of empire building. And as he marched across continents, he not only spread Greek culture, but also absorbed and disseminated the culinary practices of the lands he conquered. His campaigns were a two-way street of cultural exchange, where spices and recipes traveled alongside philosophies and military tactics. It wasn't just Greek soldiers who returned home. It was Greek cooks, armed with new ingredients and ideas. This culinary cross-pollination had lasting impacts. Consider the introduction of Persian rice dishes into Greek cuisine, or the spread of Greek winemaking techniques throughout the East. These weren't just culinary curiosities. They were symbols of the blending of cultures that characterized Alexander's reign. The dinner table became a microcosm of his empire, where the meeting of East and West wasn't just theoretical, but tangible and delicious. Yet, for all its glamour, the banquet as a political tool had its limits. Alexander's vision of unity through cuisine sometimes clashed with the realities of cultural pride and local traditions. Not every guest was thrilled to see their native dishes supplanted by Macedonian imports. While Alexander might have dreamed of a world where Greek and Persian sat side by side at the table, the truth was often more complicated. Food, like politics, is deeply personal, and not everyone was eager to embrace this culinary globalization. Still, the symbolism of these feasts can't be overstated. They were a testament to Alexander's ambition, his ability to bring together disparate peoples under one roof and one menu. They highlighted the power of food as a unifying force, even as they underscored the challenges of forging a cohesive identity in a diverse empire. Alexander's banquets were as much about diplomacy as they were about dinner, a reminder that sometimes history's greatest dramas unfold not on the battlefield, but at the dining table. As we continue to explore the legacy of Alexander's culinary conquests, remember that each feast was a dance of diplomacy, a delicate balance of power and persuasion. The next time you sit down to a meal, think of the great king and his table, where every bite could change the world. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this fascinating story, where food and politics intertwine in the epic saga of one of history's most legendary figures. And so, we find ourselves at the end of our culinary journey through Alexander the Great's world, where the dinner table was as much a battlefield as any war-torn field. But what does it all mean for us, sitting here with smartphones and instant noodles? Well, let's dig into the legacy of Alexander's diet and dining practices, and what it tells us about history's greatest PR manager. First off, Alexander's dining habits were more than just a reflection of his personal taste. They were a microcosm of his empire-building strategy. The dude wasn't just about conquering lands. He was about blending cultures. His table was the original melting pot, where Persian spices mingled with Greek wine, and Egyptian figs found their way into Macedonian mouths. It was a culinary fusion that mirrored his political ambitions. This wasn't just about putting food on the table. It was about putting new ideas in people's heads. By embracing the cuisines of the lands he conquered, Alexander demonstrated a rare flexibility for his time, showing that power wasn't just about domination, but also about integration. And let's be real, the man was an early adopter of globalization before it was cool. But while the romanticized image of Alexander feasting on exotic delicacies sounds like an ancient version of a foodie Instagram account, the reality was a bit more pragmatic. Yes, there were peacocks and spices, but there were also onions and barley, the humbler staples that actually kept the empire running. It's a reminder that while history loves to focus on the opulent and the extraordinary, it's often the everyday and the mundane that truly shape events. This brings us to the myths that have swirled around Alexander like so much aromatic smoke from a banquet spit. The image of the great conqueror reclining with grapes being fed to him is tantalizing, sure, but also misleading. It paints a picture of decadence that belies the strategic brilliance behind his feasts. Those banquets were less about indulgence and more about influence, each dish a diplomatic tool, each goblet a political statement. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moves are made at the dinner table, not on the battlefield. Now let's talk legacy. Alexander's fusion of cuisines didn't just start with him. It set off a chain reaction that rippled across the ancient world. The blending of Greek and Eastern culinary traditions paved the way for a more interconnected world, where trade routes became conduits not just for goods, but for ideas and cultures. Fast forward a few centuries, and you can see the echoes of Alexander's influence in the Silk Road, where spices and silk flowed alongside philosophies and inventions. It was a testament to the enduring power of food as a unifying force, a theme that resonates even today in our globalized world. But it's not all a glorious tale of culinary diplomacy. There were real challenges too. Not everyone was keen on swapping their traditional dishes for Macedonian imports. Cultural pride and local traditions often clashed with Alexander's vision of a united table. It's a reminder that while food can be a tool for unity, it can also be a flashpoint for resistance. People aren't just what they eat, they're also what they refuse to eat. This tension between integration and identity, between globalization and tradition, is as relevant today as it was in Alexander's time. In the end, Alexander's dining practices and their broader implications offer a rich tapestry of lessons for the modern world. They remind us that history is as much about the mundane as it is about the monumental, that the myths we tell ourselves often gloss over the gritty realities, and that behind every grand narrative of conquest and glory, there are very real, very human stories of survival, adaptation, and sometimes rebellion. It's a story of how a man who conquered empires also conquered palates, and in doing so, shaped the course of history. So, as you think back on our journey through Alexander's diet, remember that history isn't just about the big names and the big battles. It's also about the small moments, the shared meals, the quiet acts of diplomacy that unfold over a bowl of lentil soup. And while the myths may paint Alexander as a god among men, the truth is that he was a master of strategy, not just in war, but in the kitchen too. His legacy is a testament to the power of food as a force for change, a reminder that sometimes the most profound shifts in history happen not with a bang, but with a bite. As we wrap up this feast of historical analysis, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to Alexander the Great, not just the warrior, but the chef, the diplomat, the strategist. His story is one of ambition and innovation, of myth and reality, and ultimately of a man who understood that the path to an empire's heart might just run through its stomach. Here's to Alexander, the original culinary conqueror, and to a history that is as delicious as it is enlightening. Cheers and bon appetit.